All right, what's up? Welcome. Let's get into it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I will open it up. We can have calls here in a bit. But I want to get through the information of which there was a profuse amount that I didn't get to. I only got to a small amount of the information I had here present beyond the slides in my notes and in all the books stacked all around me. So we're going to work our way through that, and I'm going to open it up for calls and for disagreements and for debates. And of course, debate-wise, you can call in on any of the topics related to theology, philosophy, metaphysics, biblical theology, Roman Catholic apologetics and history, dogmatic teachings, conciliar teachings, ecumenical councils. We're going to be looking at quite a few of those tonight. We're going to be going through quite a few Denzingers, all them Denzingers. If you have notes handy, tonight will be a night that you'd want to take notes, because I'm going to go through a lot of references. Now, all these references are available online, and I will try to pull up all the ones that I can. I think almost all of these will be available. And I want to get through all or most of the argumentation. If I don't get through some aspect or some part of this, because it's a lot of material I got around me, I may just do like a part 2 or something. But we're going to walk through first the full slide presentation, and I'm going to take time on each slide to actually make the arguments for that slide. So, as you saw, I think, in the tweets and in the DMs, they were very sus and shady about what exactly the debate was over. Again, we all know that this debate came about because of the Timcast debate. Cameron reached out to me because he wanted to set up a version of the Timcast debate. I said, let's do it. So I'll show you right here to make it very clear that trying to make it fit on the whole screen here. Yep. This is the later text where after I had asked for, I'll show you the first, let me show you the first text. And then you'll get the point. It's not. This is the only reason I'm doing this is because they're acting like this is some sort of a thing that I made up and I'm being deceptive. And I didn't come to actually debate the topic. I sent Cameron here, as you can see, questions about the mosque prayers by the popes, and I asked him here, are these actions okay in your mind? And did Dr. Trent agree to discussing previous dogmatic teaching on Muslims? I wanted to argue from the very get-go that the Muslims have a contradictory placement in Roman Catholic dogmatic teaching. He says, I'm sure he will be open to it, but I'm still waiting on those councils so I can send them to him. In other words, it was somehow his weird understanding that I was going to give him all my sources. And I said, I've never been in a debate where I'm supposed to give everybody else the sources. As Father Deacon pointed out, this isn't, lawfare. This isn't discovery where we present all of our case. This is a debate. I've never heard of this. So, no, I'm not giving you my sources and my arguments ahead of time. This is insane. And then Cameron says, we'll shoot for this. And I said, bringing up previous dogmatic teaching is cool. Cameron gave me a thumbs up. So from my vantage point, I specifically said, tell them that I want to argue Vatican II and the dogmatic teachings. I stressed it twice. Cameron says yes. So Father Deacon and I decided that he would handle the epistemic and linguistic philosophy side, and I was going to argue that Roman Catholic dogmatic pronouncements have changed on whether Muslims worship the true God or not. Now, they opted even though from my vantage point, it looks as if that's all fine and dandy, according to two different okays from Cameron, including my request to specifically ask Dr. Trent if it's okay to go in that direction. And the answer was yes, twice. So, note that they decided after this was supposedly agreed upon. Now, either Cameron dropped the ball and didn't mention that to them, or they conferred and decided that it would be their strategy to say, I don't care what he talks about because we'll just say it's not relevant to the topic. But as you can see from my vantage point, I was in good faith debating the magisterial teaching on the Muslims. Now, these two people represent the Roman Catholic position. They don't represent a school of academia primarily. I'm sure they have their academic credentials and their various theories of reference and so forth. None of that is what is on the table from my side of the debate. My side of the debate is worship. What has the Roman Catholic Magisterium said about Islamic worship and adoration? And has it changed from the papal teaching? That's it. That's what I decided. That's why Father Deacon prepared all of this information on linguistic reference, intentionality, etc., non-substitutivity of indexicals, all of that. And that's why I spent time making all these slides. Now, the Roman Catholics, the very few, now if you read the comments, what's funny is like they're just in massive damage control because the comments are 98% that they ended up looking like absolute clowns. And as Sneck said, this was a massacre on all fronts, whether optics, whether the actual debate, whether the actual performance, any of it, it was a massacre. Every poll is anywhere from 70 to 80% our side. So 98% of the comments, 70, 80% in all polls, including Cameron's poll that he took down. So this is how pathetic and just, they're just such slime balls, man. See, do you see why I am so just impatient with the Roman Catholics? It's the same tactics that you get with Muslims. This is what they do. They just act like complete snakes. And you can't trust them. They will lie. They will do everything they can to pull these stupid, sneaky tricks. And you know what? Why is any of your tricks necessary? If you have the truth, you don't need all this stuff. You don't need a bunch of weaselly scheming and cunning tricks and tactics. And we'll get him with this. And all you got to do is present your positions, argue them, and face up to them like a man. Should be pretty easy. Here's the original poll that went up in the midst of the debate. And the poll had 733 votes, and it was 80% our side, 22% them. Cameron took down these polls. So it's damage control. That's why they're shifting now to arguing about what I agreed to in the debate in DMs. They'd rather debate that than the actual positions that the papal teachings have already said for centuries about Islam, centuries after the advent of Islam, by the way. And so Tomaszewski showed that he had no knowledge of Islam and no idea about even the history of the basics when he thought that medieval papal statements were at the early birth of Islam. It's like he didn't even know the centuries that when Islam comes about. So, pretty embarrassing on all fronts, as far as I could tell. So let's get into the slides, and I'm going to walk through the specific quotes. Now, I had to cut a couple slides. One of the ones I cut was, I believe it was Pope Sergius II. Let me see if I have that note. Because there's quite a bit, obviously, in the Middle Ages on... Okay, yeah, here it is. Pope Sergius IV in the year 1009. So we're about 100 years before Urban II's famous call for the First Crusade. And some of these early medieval documents you can't really find. They're not known. They're not... we don't have extant copies of these things. You kind of have to just look at other, historians of the time in the Middle Ages who write about or say, Pope so-and-so, Pope Sergius IV in 1009 first called for the expulsion of Muslims from Jerusalem. And in the case of 1009, the expulsion was because the Muslims had destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So the first call by the papacy to extirpate the Muslims from any Christian land, as far as I'm aware, there might be something a little earlier. Let's see. There's a statement that's also obscure and maybe a little bit hard to find from Pope Adrian II to fight against the unspeakable Saracens. Let's see exactly when that was, because that could be right around the same time. Okay, so this is a little bit earlier. So perhaps Pope Adrian is the first mention of some sort of military stance against Islam. And then we get the first call for expulsion of Muslims by Pope Sergius IV in 1009. And then we come to the first and very well-known First Crusade claim. And I've got the sources here for you if you want to go look these up. So Pope Urban II calls for the First Crusade at the Council of Clermont in 1095. And this one is great because look at the attitude of the papacy here in the way that they speak of Islam, the language that they use. All who die by the way, whether land or sea, in battle against the pagans. Now this is against the Muslims. So the Muslims are identified as infidel pagans here. They shall have immediate remission of sins. Now, theologically speaking, that's an interesting one. How is the Pope granting remission of sins? Note it doesn't actually say remission of temporal debt for sin, which we might explain that as, I'm going blank. My mind is... I was so ramped up from the debate, I didn't sleep very much last night. I'm going blank on what's the term where you erase your temporal debt. Indulgence. Note that this passage, interestingly, doesn't say anything about an indulgence. It straight up says remission of sins. Immediate remission of sins, not remission of the temporal punishment or an indulgence. This I grant through the power of God, which I am invested. What a disgrace of the despised and base race which worships the demons. So Islamic belief and worship at 1095 is the infidel pagan that worships demon faith. Right? Keep that in mind. Now, again, in the debate, this came up because I'm going to show that the papacy, the magisterium that these people are committed to. Remember, the highest authority in Rome is not the academics. It's not the school of the Thomists. It's not the school of the Scotists. It's not even Thomas Aquinas. He's not the highest authority. In fact, in Roman Catholic theology, he got several dogmatic things wrong. Like the Immaculate Conception, famously. And so the schools and the doctors and the philosophers, even in the Roman system, are subordinate to the magisterium of the papacy. And one of the things that we have, now keep in mind, there is no actual list of the full magisterium. We don't know exactly what it is. But one thing that we can point to, which is the magisterium, at least in part, is Denzinger, the sources of Catholic dogma. And the Vatican itself will cite Denzinger. So hopefully we all understand that. And we're going to look at some passages in Denzinger, by the way, that are relevant to this debate, which we never actually got to, concerning previous Roman Catholic teaching about what is necessary for Mohammedans to have the faith. Now, I wish I had gotten to this point because it would have shown that their argument that they worship the one true God, adore the one true God, or believe in the one true God, that believing in some sense would have to constitute, quote, faith. Because at one point, Dr. Boomer, whatever his name was arguing that the demons know the one God. They believe in that one God. So a Muslim can believe in know the one God, believe in the one God. But the magisterium, and by the way, that's not equivalent to loving the one God. Okay, so that was the point. Love and adoration. Demons don't love and adore Jesus and the Father. And the whole point of the book of James is that their faith or their knowledge is dead. The knowledge that the demons have is a dead knowledge. Oh, exactly like what I was arguing with the Muslims and Jake, the Muslim metaphysician. Jake knows about the Trinity. Does he love the Trinity? No, explicitly not. And Islam is predicated as a religion on the foundation of rejecting the Trinity explicitly. I don't even think that in the case of perhaps Tomaszewski, he knew that. But let me also remind you that this is not just a statement of these people are infidels. The religion was seen as so nasty, so vile, so reprehensible, and so antichrist that it was necessary for the Catholic states, not just in terms of the Crusade, as we're going to see in a moment, Catholic states in general, to begin to enact civil state penalties against Muslims, against Jews. Does this sound like, keep in mind, as we're going to see, the wording and the language of Vatican II? The 12th Ecumenical Council for the Romans, this is called Lateran IV, 1215. And this is interesting because, side note, this is another place where absolute divine simplicity is affirmed dogmatically for the Roman Catholics. The Peter Lombard doctrine of simplicity is explicitly affirmed in the Fourth Lateran Council. But it's also very interesting if you read down in the statements and the decrees of the 12th Council here, Lateran IV, for the Papists. The Jews are not pictured as brothers in the Abrahamic faith. Remember, Abrahamic faith is very important in Vatican II as this idea that all that call upon the God in the Bible. Remember when Trent said the Islamic term God is just conditioned by divine revelation. So he tried to stray away from natural theology arguments, contrary to Tomaszewski. He was trying to argue that just linguistically, when Muhammad picks up the term God, it's from the Old Testament or from what he's hearing. And that must be then the same Unitarian referent of the Jews. That's why I was arguing that the Old Testament is not a Unitarian God, which he did not want to address, and which he contradicted himself on, because in the live stream right before that, a couple nights earlier, he had said that David didn't know who Jesus was. The Trinity is not back at that time. They don't know Trinity yet. And did you catch in his quote going around that he was actually making an Nestorian statement? He said, you think that this Yeshua revealed in the Old Testament, this angel of the Lord, you think that's Jesus in Palestine, a Jew in the first century of Palestine? Yeah, unless you want to be Nestorian. It's the same subject, you goofus. So he didn't even know he's making Nestorian statements. But who knows? He was in a drunken stupor, so we don't even know if he was coherent or if he even who knows if he even recalls what he said today. And the other thing the more I thought about it, I don't think this manner of acting out is not just what you see with somebody drunk. This is the pattern and manner of acting out of people on SSRIs. And particularly if a person on SSRIs begins to drink, that's when you see this type of a manic manifestation. I don't know, just my speculation, but I've seen that many times over the years. Now, not only are they not brothers in the Abrahamic faith, Jews are specifically with Muslims to be designated as different dressed people. Muslims should not intermarry with Christian women. Does this sound at all like the attitude that we're going to see by the time of Vatican II? And I'm only putting this in here to express how different the attitude was of the papacy at this time. Jews may not hold public offices in Christian places. They are hostile to Christianity, and they must never be allowed to exercise power over Christ, because we forbid this due to Jews being blasphemers. Does that sound like they have the same referent? The love and adoration of the same deity? Lateran 4. The Catholic state must suppress Judaism. Wait a minute, this is the same God. Why do we got to suppress it? And suppress Jewish power. This is the Roman Catholic medieval papal position. We order that Jews are compelled by the secular power to not exact interest and usury, under the pain of excommunication for the princes who don't enforce this. So the Pope is saying that Catholic princes that don't enforce these separations and divisions can be excommunicated. And then he goes on to talk about the Holy Land and the call for another liberation of the Holy Land from these pagans. If you do not fight, if you are committed to fighting the Muslims, not fighting Arab peoples, not fighting random peoples, fighting the evil race and belief of the Saracens. The Saracens are just a stand-in for the Muslims, and we're going to see that explicitly here in a moment. The pagan demon worshippers. If you commit to the crusade and you backslide and don't commit to then you are excommunicated from Rome right there. Do you see that? Keep in mind, the attitude of faith and morals of the papacy is what's unchanging. Well, but it's time and circumstance. No, I know time and circumstance. But in Catholic theology, morals based in natural law and faith based in supernatural revelation is supposedly not able to change. So the faith that the Catholic Church professes in the Middle Ages can in no way be equated to or likened to or shared with the other entities that are blasphemously worshiping demons and hating Christ in the Trinity and killing Christians in the Holy Land. Thus, we must go to war with them. Imagine thinking that the people that you're going to war with are really just secretly worshiping the same God as you. And hey, bro, why even go to war? Why even have martyrs? When we went to Italy, we went into the giant cathedral, San Maria Maggiore, I think it is. And when you walk in there, it's a giant cathedral with giant chapels in the cathedral. And each chapel is giant. And each chapel is devoted, I forget how many there were, 8, 10, something like that. Each chapel is devoted to a certain nation, a historic Catholic nation. And when you walk into the Poland chapel, which has giant paintings and murals all over the chapel wall inside the cathedral, all you see is crusaders fighting off Muslims. I'm going from memory. Is it Jan Sobieski? I don't even remember who's in that. Isn't that the great Polish? And is Lili Sobieski even, is she related to him? Probably. Anyway, regardless of what Polish king it was, these dudes are all famous for fighting Muslims. And they're honored in these giant murals. The victory of heaven over the demonic, infidel, Saracen Mohammedans. Imagine betraying your ancestors and the people that you're so proud of in your Catholic heritage who fought against these demons. And you betray them for these criminals in the Vatican, these scumbags, and the scumbags on the internet that follow them and act like scumbags. Imagine betraying all of that and your heritage and your ancestors, what they fought for your internet clout and for your papist nonsense. Isn't it ironic, given how much Roman Catholics and papists are committed to their heritage and their tradition that they supposedly love so much? And now they're defending the last 70 years of popes that want to pray with Muslims in mosque and say it's the same God. They built the Abu Dhabi Faith Center premised on this nonsense. You're hypocrites. You're lying to yourself. Fifth Crusade, 1217, Pope Innocent III writes a bull called Quia Maior. And in this bull, he says, Christian peoples, in fact, have held all Saracens up to the time of Blessed Gregory. But then a son of perdition arose, the false prophet Muhammad, who seduced many from the worldly elements and pleasures of the flesh. Although his treachery has prevailed up to this day, we nevertheless put our trust in the Lord, who has already given us a sign to come that the end of the beast is approaching, whose number in Revelation is 666. In addition, the former great and grave injuries which the treacherous Saracens have inflicted on the Redeemer. And then he goes on to say, basically, that this is an antichrist. So Muhammad is a great antichrist, according to Pope Innocent III. And this bull, which you can find online, is another call to crusade against the Islamic faith, because it is antichrist. Imagine saying that antichrist has the same faith as Christ. Imagine saying that. That is the sophistry and the nonsense and the smoke and mirrors of the philosophy that these guys threw up to try to cloak the obvious. Muslims and Christians do not worship the same God, because worship and adore is not the same thing as a mental conceptual abstraction of knowing about. Just like Jake the Muslim metaphysician knows a lot about, he probably knows more about Orthodox and Roman Catholic Trinitarian theology than most Roman Catholics and perhaps many Orthodox. And I only say that because Jake spent many years getting dirt and information and reconnaissance in our Discord, pretending that he was an actual inquirer and interested in orthodoxy. I don't mean a literal inquirer, but like inquiring in a loose sense. Like, oh, I'm interested. Tell me about orthodoxy. Oh, yeah, sure. Here's this. This is. And all he was doing was trying to get all of our arguments to understand our position. So Jake could let's say Jake goes on to get multiple PhDs in medieval metaphysics, Byzantine theology, and patristic studies. And Jake writes multiple PhD theses and texts that explicate the Orthodox doctrine of the Trinity perfectly. Does he, in a sense, know the Trinity? Of course. But it's in the same sense as the demons know the one God. And that's precisely why I wanted to show, number one, the Vatican contradicts itself on how they understood the Mohammedans and their worship. And number two, you don't get anywhere with that, and it is part of the Ecumenist movement and is itself an antichrist idea. To equate abstract knowledge of the thing with love and adoration. And that's why when it got to the Tomaszewski clip, it specifically did get to the point of where he said Lois Lane loves and adores Clark Kent. She doesn't know about Superman. And of course that analogy fails, as we'll see here in a moment, because Kal-El is actually deceiving people, who Superman really is, and he's deceiving people through multiple identities. So that would actually work to prove our point that the Roman Catholic idea is in fact that God is actually present in all the religions. He's just behind the cloak of all the different religions, which is perennialism, which is exactly what we're arguing Vatican II is. So, 15th Ecumenical Council, this is 1311 to 1321, or I meant that should be 12, 1311 to 12. This is Pope Clement V. Now, keep in mind, in Vatican II, the papacy goes and prays towards Mecca in the mosque, afterwards, at least in the Blue Mosque. This is, Francis did it, Benedict did it. I'm not sure if John Paul II did it, but he might as well have done it because he did the Assisi gatherings, which is basically the same point. Here, the 15th Ecumenical Council under Pope Clement V states that the blasphemous public worship, notice here, this is the worship of the Muslims. Now, wait a minute. How do you worship the same God as us, but the worship is blasphemy? Is Catholic worship then blasphemy? If you can truly worship God while also blaspheming, help me to understand that, Roman Catholics. That's why at one point early on, they were arguing to some degree that Muslims worship demons, but it's also Allah at the same time. Okay, that's not accepted. Like, that doesn't get you anywhere. That's not what is worth anyone's time. And if the whole point of this was to prove that there's a dead faith that demons and Muslims have, what does that get you? That doesn't explain the text of Vatican II saying that they worship and adore, together with us Catholics, the one God. But that's what Vatican II says. That's why they didn't want to go to Vatican II, because it's a problem text. And even if we went to Vatican II and they had some sort of Tim Gordon style explanation of hermeneutic of continuity, well, the actions of the popes are not at all a hermeneutic of continuity. Because I'm showing you the actions of the popes for centuries from the year 10,000 or 1009 here to 1312, where it's, if you kill them, you'll have your sins remitted. Is the worship of Islam good, virtuous, or is it blasphemous? Now, whether you think this is right or not, listen to the wording of Pope Clement V here. It is an insult to the name and disgrace to the Christian faith that in parts of the world, under Christian princes, where Saracens, Muslims live, sometimes apart and sometimes intermingled, the Saracen priests that are some commonly called the Zabazala, in their temples or mosques, in which the Saracens meet to adore the infidel Muhammad. Muhammad is an infidel. That means not of the faith. If you're not of the faith, then you're not worshiping the God of that faith. Keep in mind the faith, because I'm going to show you from Roman Catholic dogmatic statements what they said was necessary for a Mohammedan to have the faith. Did you know that the Holy Office was asked these questions back in the 1700s? Missionaries were going out. They met Muslims that wanted to be baptized. The question arose, if they're on their deathbed or if they don't really understand us, can we just baptize them as Muslims? Guess what the Holy Office said? No. But wait a minute. If a Muslim worships the same God and adores the same God as us, the referent is the same, why would we not baptize them if the faith is the same? The faith is not the same. And you'll see that in a moment. It's kind of absurd that we even have to demonstrate this. Like, that I even have to come on here and show you the slides in the medieval teaching. And you can go look all these up, by the way. They're all publicly sourced on the internet. I mean, do people not know this? Do you not know about the Crusades and what the Pope said? And like, I thought everybody knew. I mean, I went to college and had a class on the Crusades, right? And I had a liberal professor, obviously, right? Shocker. And I mean, despite being a liberal and apologist for Islam, like, I still learned all this. And it would take you 10 minutes, tops, to go through and check these decrees of these ecumenical councils for the Roman Catholics. He goes on to say, they adore the infidel, the faithless Muhammad in their mosques. They loudly extol and invoke his name. In the hearing of Christian and Saracens, they make declarations in his honor. There is a place, moreover, where there was once buried a Saracen, whom other Saracens venerated as a saint. By the way, the Shia do that. So that's not made up. That seems very likely. A great number of Saracens flock there, quite often from far and near. This brings disrepute on our faith. Wait a minute. I thought, wouldn't it be the same? No, our faith is brought into disrepute by them honoring their so-called martyrs in Christian lands. This practice could not be tolerated without displeasing God. Muslim worship displeases God. It is not accepted. It is subject to divine judgment, he says in the next section. All Christian princes must forbid Muslim worship. They are to remove the offense of Islam altogether from their territories because it is sacrilegious. The name of Muhammad must be expressly forbidden. Why? Doesn't Muhammad teach and lead us to the one God, according to Vatican II? Just the wording of Vatican II versus this is night and day. Can you not see that? How do you not see this? Like, what goes on in the mind of the Roman Catholic when they read and see this to make this insanity work? I don't understand. I can't grasp it. And again, this is partly why I left Rome. Because this stuff is just complete nonsense. Just be honest with yourself. Well, I guess I'll be a sedevacantist trad cat. Good luck with that. See how that works out. Moving on. Council of Vienne, 1311 to 1313, under Pope Clement V. Muslims are the faithless enemies of Christianity. Antichrist, worshippers of demons, faithless, infidels. Their worship is blasphemous and not accepted by God. They blaspheme Christ. They're unclean. But it's still the same God. They still love and adore the same God as us. Here's a challenge. Where prior to Vatican II do we find any language like Vatican II about Muslims? I'm aware of one statement that was a letter that the Pope, one Pope in the Middle Ages, right around the 1300s, somewhere in there. I forget exactly which Pope it was. There is a letter that sometimes Roman Catholics will cite where a Pope says something to the effect of, "You also acknowledge one God." But how do we get from that, even if I grant you that one? And who knows with these Roman Catholics, it could be a forgery. Even if we grant that one, does that cancel out all of the other lists of vitriolic statements that we've had so far? Faithless enemies, blasphemers, antichrist, demon worshippers. And by the way, even if you could find the Vatican II statement in the Middle Ages, all that would show is that they're schizophrenic. They contradict themselves because they can't both be right. Pope Calixtus III, 1455. The sin of man has been taken and ruined. Wait, excuse me. We need to reconquer Constantinople, which in punishment for the sin of man has been taken and ruined by Muhammad, the son of the devil, the enemy of Christ. Muhammad, son of the devil, enemy of Christ. Furthermore, Christians are languishing in slavery. Do you think the Muslims believe that it's the same God? Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's the Catholic position based on natural theology, which is what matters. Yeah, but it's going to matter in the world if the Muslims have the same faith as you when the Muslims come into your church and blow themselves up like they just did in Syria. Does that sound like the same faith as you? Sons of the devil and enemy of Christ. Oh, but they preach the same God as Christ. If you don't preach Christ, you don't preach the same God as Christ. And we're going to see that from Christ himself. I vow to deliver the Christians in slavery, and I exalt the true faith So Christianity is the true faith here. Islam, the false faith of Antichrist. And we will extirpate the diabolical sect of the reprobate, faithless Muhammad. Reprobate, faithless Muhammad. Demon worshiper. Antichrist. And these deceivers want you to believe it's the same God. And why is this such a big deal? Because if you follow the papacy and these people into this delusion, you will go down the route of spiritual death and blindness and worshiping like they do. You will unite yourself to the spirit of Francis and Leo and John Paul II. And that is a spirit that goes into these demonic abodes and worships that God. Their God is not our God. It is not the triad. They have surrendered it by doing these actions. That's why it matters. That's why the people who argue against us act like demons, because they're deluded. They cannot understand or see the truth because they care more about the opinions of men, their paycheck, their internet clout, milking the low IQ Roman Catholic audience out there, which is probably, I'm guessing, a lot more monetarily beneficial than the Orthodox world. I don't know. I've never been trying to make money as a Catholic creator, so I don't know. But I would imagine there's a lot more, dupes and people to grift from. And if you want to be like Scam Shamu, why not just invent apostolic Christianity, which is all the groups, and then you can milk them all. Now let's look at all of what we saw in these. These are just samples, by the way. You understand, there are many more that perhaps are not even translated into English or that we don't have direct access to. I'm talking about medieval from the year 900 to, 1500. 600, 700 years of papal statements about Crusades, the religion of Islam, etc., how bad it is, as well as Judaism too, by the way, that demonstrate this point. Now let's look at the attitude of the infamous Vatican II documents. The church regards with esteem the Muslims. This esteem? Are you serious? The people that you just called for the last several centuries faithless, reprobate, Antichrist, demons? So in other words, the Roman Catholic Church esteems Antichrist? They adore the one God. No, they don't. There is no adoration of the one God that isn't the Father, that isn't triad. There isn't one. Whatever that's adoring is some idol or some fiction. And even Jake would tell you, I don't adore the Trinitarian God or God the Father. So imagine, and I put the clip of the guy, the crazy guy. When I said, do you think Jake adores the one true God, explicitly saying he rejects the Trinity in Christ? Yes, he does. In other words, Trent and Tomaszewski don't adore the one true God even, because they believe that their deity is this common generic deity. And he didn't even know that it's Jesus in the Old Testament. He thought Jesus of Nazareth, a first century Palestine, what? First century Palestine Jew? Isn't the angel of the Lord Yeshua in the Old Testament. Good job being a historian with your dual subject Christology, you idiot. Nostra Aetate goes on to say that the God of the Muslims is one, he lives and subsists in himself, is merciful, all-powerful, and the creator of heaven and earth. Now, right away we can refute this, because the one God of Christianity that is our God is the Father. That's the Nicene Creed. And the creator who will judge the world is Jesus. So that's also false. Muslims do not adore the judge and the creator of heaven and earth, because that is Christ countless times in the scriptures. So no, they do not. Islam is predicated on, for its very existence, opposition to the deity of Christ, the Trinity, God being a father. Allah is not a father. God is not spirit in Islam. Did you know that too? God is not a spirit. And God has limited updated knowledge. He's not even omniscient in Islam. And by the way, when Islam says he's creator, they mean he literally actually creates evil, which has existence. So they're actually Gnostic dualist Manichaeans when they say creator. So you see how stupid this is to use the terminology as if it's synonymous amongst the worldviews and the systems. It's just as dumb as the Mormon thing, which we've brought up a million times. And apparently, according to the original stream a couple nights ago, Dr. Trent, I haven't listened to the whole stream, but many were saying, so I could be wrong about this if it's not true, but many were saying that he said, yeah, Mormons worship the same God. Apparently, he doesn't know that Mormons believe that God is a man who became God. And God the Father in Mormonism still has his created body. He's a creature God who became God. So even if you go the Thomistic natural theology route of supposedly core essential attributes that pick out the generic deity, right? And those would be things like he's one, he's absolutely simple, he's non-composite, he's the first cause, he's outside of time and space, he's omniscient, he's omnipotent, right? These are the things that the Thomists, the Roman Catholic natural theology guys will say. These are the things that we reason about this one first principle apart from revelation. This is natural theology. Those are the things we know apart from revelation through philosophy and metaphysics, supposedly. Oh, really? So when Swinburne, one of their great proponents, lists the 8 or 9, whatever it is, core attributes, that he doesn't even know that Islam rejects several of those supposed core attributes. This is how stupid this is. They don't even know what Islam teaches. Now, maybe that Doherty guy does. I don't know, because he claimed that he had mastered Islam studying under Dr. Norman Geisler or something. I don't know. But he didn't provide any assistance or any backing up when Tomaszewski made some super basic, stupid level mistakes when he thought that medieval popes were at the birth and the early phase of Renaissance, of Islam. So let's get back to the other statement, because you understand you have to read both statements. Islam takes pain to submit to God's decrees, his inscrutable decrees, just like Abraham. The problem is that they do not do this like Abraham, because Abraham believed in Christ. Paul says in Galatians 4 that the gospel was preached beforehand to Abraham. And then he goes on here to say, as we pointed out, that the only seed that counts, that is Abraham's seed, are those in Christ. So there is no such thing as a Abrahamic faith. That doesn't exist. Or if you want to use the term, the only Abrahamic faith is faith in Jesus. That's the whole point of Galatians. For ye are the children of God through faith in Christ. You're the seed. If you were baptized into Christ, you are one in Christ, and you are Abraham's seed. You're the true Israel. Muslims and Jews are not. It's very simple. It's theology 101, biblical theology 101. The promised covenant blessing of Abraham comes to Gentiles through Jesus. Right there. So there is no other faith that matters or counts that's an Abrahamic faith. It doesn't exist. It's an invention of ecumenists and natural theologians over the centuries. This idea of a common faith of the monotheistic religions. That doesn't even exist. Because I don't know what monotheism is without an arbitrary list of the supposed core attributes. And when Swinburne lists them, the first thing that the Garrity paper does is say, there's no reason why this should take me in the direction of Thomism and Catholicism. Why should I not conclude from this list of arbitrary 8 attributes that the God is really the perennialist God, the Sophia Perennis God? There's nothing that makes me say that that structure has to be within classical Roman Catholic theology. It could just simply be perennialism. It could be René Guénon. It could be Fridtjof Schuon. And beyond that, there's Sikhism. There's versions of Zoroastrianism. There's theistic Satanism. Arguably Marcionism. Arguably henotheism. There's the Druze. There's the Shakti religion, which is a version of Hinduism that's monotheistic. There's the Kaodai sect in Buddhism. There's the Baha'i faith. So there's 9 other monotheistic faiths.
Well, but those aren't the monotheistic faiths that have a first cause.
Oh, what if they do have a first cause? What if I'm a theistic Satanist and Set is my first cause?
Well, but he's not omniscient.
You mean like Allah, who updates his knowledge? Uh-oh. This is why Jake is actually pretty useful for us, because Jake follows Ibn Taymiyyah. And Jake knows that Ibn Taymiyyah, who is like the Palamos of Islam, believes that God has limited knowledge that he updates himself with, because the Quran says that. So they don't even know that traditional Sunni Islam doesn't believe God's omniscient. They're idiots. It's like the Vatican wrote this and didn't really know the nuances of Islam. It's kind of funny, actually.
Well, Ibn Taymiyyah is not real Islam.
Okay, now we get into this other stupid argument as to what's the real Islam or the real Judaism. And this actually works in our favor as well. Because if you're going to tell me what the core central tenets of Judaism are, wouldn't that be determined by the system of Judaism and not what you as a Roman Catholic natural theologian wants to pick out as a commonality? In other words, to argue that there is a common core already assumes the thing that could easily be in question. How do we know that that's the common core? What if being triad is essential to God? If being triad is essential to God, I'm not saying triad is essence. I'm saying that for God to be God, it is essential that he is Father, Son, and Spirit, and that is true, obviously. Then you can't make triad non-essential to God. It's so dumb. And I didn't even go into this in that debate because it's so stupid to even have to debate this. Christ being divine is essential to who our God is in the Nicene Creed. And if you remove one of those things, it's no longer that God. I believe in the Trinity, and I believe in all the things you guys believe, but I don't believe God's omniscient. Guess what? It's not the same God anymore. Now you have a heterodox God that is like a creature, in that he has created attributes. So it's no longer the Trinity, you idiot. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. By the way, there's 7 places in the Quran that speaks of Allah's limited knowledge that has to be updated. It's like, and I think I'm going from memory. Maybe Jake or one of these Salafi people, like they described it like God gets like a daily update as to the new facts. I'm not joking. Like, Islam is so stupid. By the way, Why would you want to say you worship the same God as when Islam is literally like the dumbest cult on the planet, man? It is literally a cult for sub IQ. I mean, you have to be sub IQ to actually study and look at this religion. It is so stupid, as in so many ways and in so many aspects. And for the Vatican to sit here and like say we have the same God, it's like you're just making yourself look even stupider by saying that. And by the way, the same goes for the ecumenists in the Orthodox world. I don't know why they think this is such a gotcha. It's not. Of course there's ecumenists in the Orthodox world. I've been calling them out for over 10 years. I've done countless podcasts against ecumenism and orthodoxy. You think I don't know that MPs and patriarchates say heterodox things? But how does that equate to the magisterium contradicting? You goobers. If we thought these patriarchs were inerrant, infallible, and the heads of the church, that might actually get you somewhere. But it's just a tu quoque, and it fails because we don't have the same system as you. And congratulations on showing that you don't understand basic Orthodox ecclesiology. That's all you demonstrate from that. Austin, 5-month member, what's up? Can Sam Hyde train you for Trent? I think at this point, I will always be doing, I mean, I don't know about always, but I'll keep doing the open calls. I just don't know that there's any point in the public Roman Catholic debates anymore. I don't even know if I want to even debate Tim anymore. And it's not because of any personal thing. It's just like, I'm not doing it on Cameron's thing. I'm done with Cameron. I'm never interacting with that dude again. These people are just such snakes, man. And it's like, it's funny because all they do is whine and bitch. They're cry bullies about me. And they're the most snaky, deceptive, lying people. I'm talking about Cameron and all that crew. Okay, Tim's never lied. I have another Catholic friend, Dave, that's been a friend of mine for a long time. He's never lied. He's always been straight up. The rest of these people, they can go suck an egg for all I care. I don't want to interact with them. I'm done. I mean, I don't know what else there is. What else can we do and say? If you don't understand at this point that papism is a giant criminal enterprise, then I don't have anything else to talk to you about. Like, I don't even want you around here. You can go elsewhere. I don't need your friendship. I don't need your interactions. I don't care about your channels. I don't care about the clicks. Now, I'm going to have open forums, and there's always the opportunity if Catholics want to call in. But there are no more public Roman Catholics even worth debating anymore. If Tim finds a giant channel, I'll do it. Because I did already tell him I would do that debate. I'm not going to do it on Cameron's channel. I will never talk to that dude again. I'm not ever talking to Sam Shamoon again. These people are insane. I mean, papism makes you go crazy. I mean, imagine defending this stuff. I mean, this is the bullshit you'd have to defend. No wonder you go crazy. And I would say when I was Tradcat, I was probably going crazy. I mean, I drank a lot as a Tradcat. Because deep down, this shit was insane. I don't know. How do I make this work? I might as well get drunk. Like, I don't know, man. Give me a cold beer. And, a lot of these people are gay. So, dude, get the F away. Like, I don't want nothing to do with Leather Daddy Albrecht or none of y'all, man. Y'all are weird gay creeps. Go away from me. Go to your pride festivals or whatever it is you do. Go away from me. Steve McLovin, $5. Roman Catholics launched the Fourth Crusade. The Muslims conquered Constantinople. Roman Catholics claim that they worship with the Muslims. Yeah, make it make sense. Make it make sense. Roll stakes, $5. Their Superman Lois Lane argument was the best that they had. Excuse me, that was the same argument that Trent Horn had about water properties and H2O. I'll be honest with you, I don't even remember what Trent Horn's argument was. That debate was so long ago. But, I mean, here's what I thought about. The more I thought about this morning when I woke up, I was thinking about the whatever soy bullshit. Like, but by the way, imagine not wanting to go to the Bible and when you sit here making these dumb analogies from freaking soy Superman shit, man. These people are just trash. They're trash people, man. They're trash people. That's why I'm done with them. Like, I don't. If you're Roman Catholic, just don't even bother. Just move on. Now, if you're interested and open to Orthodoxy or not being Roman Catholic, you're welcome. Other Roman Catholics, bye-bye. Go suck an egg. Isn't it interesting that... No, this isn't it. Here we go. In the dumb analogy used, Superman and Clark Kent are actually Kal-El tricking people. So this would mean that the true God deceives people by hiding in every religion. But that's exactly the perennialism that you end up with in the Roman Catholic position defending Vatican II. God becomes the greatest of deceivers, hiding behind the cloak of the religions. Oh, but wait a minute. What is Allah in Islam? The greatest of deceivers. Multiple places in the Quran. Oh, interesting. So, a death cult whose God is limited in knowledge and is the best of deceivers kind of sounds like the same guy that Jesus said came to steal, kill, and destroy. So the God of Islam matches up to Jesus' description of the God, little g, who fell in the beginning, who came to steal, kill, and destroy, who's Satan. Well, guess what? I actually agree with the papists. I agree with the popes. What? How? I agree with the popes of the Middle Ages. The popes of the Middle Ages stated the correct position. That's Antichrist. That's blasphemous, infidel, demon worshiping. That's the correct papal position. Not this demonic bullshit. Finally, those who have not yet received the gospel are related to the gospel in various ways, or various ways to the people of God, excuse me. In the first place, we must recall the people to whom the testament and the promises were given, and for whom Christ was born according to the flesh, Jews. On account of their fathers, they remain dear to God. God does not repent of the gifts and the callings that he issues. But the plan of salvation also includes those that acknowledge the Creator. But wait a minute, Jesus is the Creator. And Allah is the creator of evil. So if our God is not the creator of evil, then he's not the creator of Islam. And if our God and creator is Jesus, then it's also not the God and creator of Islam. And by the way, the phraseology, but I believe the phraseology is actually intended to convey. Now, it's ambiguous here, but I think they actually are intending to convey that you can be saved in Islam. Why do I think that? First of all, why would you don't even need to say the plan of salvation includes everyone. Who doesn't know that? Is there somebody doubting that the plan of salvation means Arabs and Arab peoples or Jews or Muslims? I mean, that's retarded, okay? So why even include the plan of salvation includes those who acknowledge the Creator, unless you mean to say that you can be saved if you know that there's a Creator, like a Muslim. The first amongst these are the Muslims who, professing to hold the faith of Abraham, along with us Catholics, adore the one God. Adoration. Worship and adore with us Catholics. That's the problem passages. This merciful God, who on the last day will judge mankind. Wait a minute, though. For us Christians, who judges mankind on the last day? Allah? No, Jesus. That's an explicit reference that it is not our God. It is not the same judge. It is not the same reference. And it is true that in the 16 passage, Lumen Gentium 16, it says, professing to hold the faith of Abraham. But if you look at the Nostra Aetate 3 passage, it actually says, just as Abraham. So they are saying that it's the Abrahamic faith. Hence why they created an Abrahamic Faith Center. And did you notice in the debate that in the Roman Catholic mind, what the popes do, their actions, have nothing to do with the doctrine and the theology? Really? Are you sure? Is that actually Catholic theology, that actions, whether pope or layman, have nothing to do with the faith? Let's see what Aquinas says about that. But first, note at the bottom, religions are bound up with the advanced cultures that have struggled to answer questions. In Hinduism, men contemplate the divine mystery and express it through an exhaustible abundance of myths and through searching philosophical inquiry. Okay, that's all kind of generic and bland, not necessarily problematic. Hindus seek freedom from the anguish of our human condition through ascetical practices or profound meditation or a flight to capital G God with love and trust. In other words, polytheistic Hindus now also adore and love and have faith, trust in the one God that Christians worship. No, they don't. Hindu theology is even more removed than the idiocy of Islam. And granted, Islam is nonsense, but Hindu is even further away. That's true. But to be further away or closer to us is irrelevant when what's necessary is the entirety, the whole system. Hence why, again, which I brought up in the debate, which they shouted over. They didn't want to hear this part. When St. Basil writes against Eunomius, who is just another Unitarian like Islam and like the Jews and like the Samaritan woman, Basil says, you've lost the faith. You've lost God. You do not worship the God that we worship, who is Trinity. Eunomius says, I reject your Trinity. Basil says, you no longer have God. St. John Chrysostom, Jews do not have God. They do not have the Father. They do not have the worship of God the Father. Exactly what Jesus says in John 5 and John 8. What is the patristic terminology here? Oh, it's exactly what we say, isn't it? Yeah. And I'm going to talk about them still lying about Palamos because they haven't read Palamos. They don't know that the entire first triad is against natural theology. And Palamos says, if Plato got one conceptual idea about God right, it really doesn't matter at all because it's all demonic and worthless. The very point that we're trying to make. Getting one thing or one attribute doesn't equate to worshiping and loving the thing. All it equates to is getting one attribute right. That's it. And we're going to see what Jesus says about getting one attribute or a handful of attributes right. It doesn't get you anywhere. It's not salvific. Now, they said, I don't have a problem saying it's not salvific. Oh, really? You don't have a problem saying that it's... Then why does Vatican II use the terminology of salvific presence in Islam? By admitting that, you're admitting that Vatican II is a surrendering of the position. Remember Tomaszewski's opening slides? He believes that Islam is not salvific and it does not get you to God, but that the referent is the same. And the whole point of this debate, again, is that Vatican II's documents don't just say, okay, Muslims have a conception of God. They think they love God. They think they worship God. It says together with us Catholics, they do it. You liars. Along with us, Muslims adore. Along with us, Catholics, Muslims adore the one God. Let's get a little refresher. What did the medieval popes say? They worship demons. These lunatics sat there saying that you can worship a demon and still worship the one true God. What? I mean, the sophistry of these, like, that's what this is amounting to. That's the level of sophistry of these people. Now, let's get to some of the biblical refutations, because this is where this really falls apart. Now, remember, according to them, you could worship a demon, and if you think it's the one true God, it's the same referent, but you're loving and adoring the one true God, even though you're loving and adoring, in actual fact, a demon. This is how silly this is. How does the Bible conceive of this? Does it conceive of it in this bizarre way? Or does it just flat out say, all the gods of the nations are demons? But God, Yahweh, who is Jesus, is the creator. The things that heathens sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons. What did Vatican II say about Hinduism? They also love and adore, through their practices in faith and trust, the one God. Hindus. What? Does Paul sound like he thinks that is there a sect of Hindus that do, well, I mean, there's the Thuggies, but isn't there some ancient practice of like burning a woman on an altar? Isn't that an ancient Hindu practice? Oh, am I human sacrificing my unfaithful wife on the altar? Well, it's to the one true God, even though I'm human sacrificing. Even though I'm doing it to a demon, I still love and adore the one true God. I mean, this is just insanity. It's just changing the meanings of the words. Adore and worship. No, idolatry is not identical to worshiping the one true God. And the false conceptions of God, whether in heresy or whether in apostasy, are idols. It's idolatry. So these people equate idolatry with the worship of the true God. And this is exactly what the Vatican does, and this is the spiritual sin and the delusion that they're in. They are idolaters. They worship and serve creatures in the place of the one true God. And Romans 1 is not their dumb natural theology. Romans 1 is making the point that I just said. The heathens got rid of the worship of the one true God to worship and serve creatures, Paul says. And their hearts were darkened. It doesn't say they failed to reason properly. It says their hearts were darkened and they lost the worship and love of the one true God because they worship and serve creatures, which is idolatry. Universal idolatry is not equivalent to worshiping and loving the one true God. But keep this in mind, according to these goofballs, basically everything would still get you to loving and adoring the one true God. There's nothing that would disqualify you. Even explicitly rejecting the Trinity and Incarnation, according to these idiots, still doesn't disqualify you from worshiping and adoring the one true God. That's the idiocy of this position at the highest level. And I had my friend Third Eye Noose made a comment on this I wanted to read, because I thought his comment was pretty perceptive as to where this actually leads if you think about it. I mean, on their grounds, essentially nothing is a disqualifier. Let me find that quote. Here it is. Their position negates the reality of Psalm 95 that the gods of the nations are demons. In their paradigm, when taken to its logical extension, through the Vatican II documents, nobody actually worships demons. They have all just a limited grasp of the same referent of the one true God, even in all their demonic polytheism. Exactly. This is exactly what Vatican II says. Even in Hinduism, men seek enlightenment, or whatever, how does it, freedom, through meditation or flight to God in love and trust, faith. The Hindu faith, capital G God. Let me move me so you can see it. Right there, you see it? See that? This is my friend's point. In reality, in this system, nobody actually worships demons. All they have is a limited grasp of some same referent. Even in polytheism, their position would really just argue that these people have an impoverished view of the same referent. Yeah, that's the whole point of perennialism and natural theology. Ultimately, that's what this gets you to. Then we were at full-blown perennialism and the one-world religion of Antichrist. Absolutely. So all this smoke and mirrors is literally just spiritual rot and poison from a bunch of Skittles Roman Catholics. I mean, dude, screw these butt buddies, man. They're a bunch of butt buddies. Why are you getting your theology from all these butt buddies? You shouldn't have a butt buddy. Stop being a soy man. Deuteronomy 31. They offered sacrifices to demons, which are not God. In other words, Moses says their sacrifices aren't to God. Their worship isn't to God. To gods they had not known, to new gods. A new God is a different God. If you read Deuteronomy 13 and Deuteronomy 18, when God warns the Israelites about being seduced away to another God, does he say, it's me still, but it's another God, a cloak that I wear? No, he says other gods. Don't be seduced by other gods. Other gods. Allah is an other God, you idiots. When only a Roman Catholic could take the passage with Saint Fotini, the woman at the well, and turn it into the opposite of what it says. She's the archetypal schismatic. Now remember, schismatics are great for this point because a schismatic has the same theology, generally speaking, but they've severed themselves through severance of love. So they've abandoned brotherly love. They've broken fellowship, even if they have the same theology. But I don't even know if I would say that she's actually the same theology. She thinks she has the same theology because she says we worship the one God at the where our father Jacob told us to worship. That's where Samaritanism comes from. But it's actually it's a schism that comes about in terms of worship during the time of the kings, right? With the sons like Nadab and Abimelech and like the sons when Solomon dies and then the kingdom splits. You have one of the evil sons decides that he will set up a rival place to worship, and that ties into Samaritanism. And the reason he was doing that, by the way, which is funny, it's a statist move. He wanted to control the cultists, and if his rival brother had control of Jerusalem and the temple, why not create an alternate altar for the Israelites to worship at that he had control over? So that was the geopolitical motivation for doing that. I wrote an article on that maybe 10 years ago, but point being is that she says we worship God truly according to the teaching of our father Jacob. And yes, Jesus uses the word worship here, but he says, you worship, but you don't know him. And so that'd be like, imagine switching out the previous references to offering the heathen sacrifice. It'd be like, imagine if Paul said, the heathens worship through their sacrifices. Oh, so they do worship. Did you read the passage? You worship what you don't know. We Jews worship what we do know, for salvation is of the Jews. The true salvific worship, which is the whole point of this is the whole critique of Vatican II. Vatican II is compromising and surrendering the salvific worship by granting that worship exists amongst Hindus and Muslims and Jews. But Jesus says, you worship an idol. That's what he's saying. Jesus' statement in John 4:22 is no different than Paul's statement in 1 Corinthians 10:20. Now, the woman at the well is not worshiping the same thing as whatever the heathens are sacrificing to, right? Maybe the heathen is sacrificing to Apollo. I evoke Apollo, and here is this goat. And the woman at the well, well, haha, I worship the God of Jacob. Now, this further refutes Trent, because Trent argued that because Muhammad is picking up the same word God as a referent from the Old Testament texts, the argument would be identical to the woman at the well, St. Fotini, because the Samaritans believe that they're worshiping the God of Jacob. The Samaritan tradition comes from Jacob. They're schismatics. They think, I worship the God of Jacob. And Jesus says, well, you do, and you know him, and you love him and adore him, but it's just partial, because we all worship the same God. No, Jesus flat out says, you don't know God. You don't have salvation, and you don't know God. Therefore, Muslims don't know God. They don't have salvation. They do not worship and adore God, because to worship and adore, in the true sense, means a real connection, to have that love connection. The love boat, the love connection. Now, what about the Pharisees? They also turn out to be a great example of this. I know you do not have the love of God in you. Now, wait a minute. Remember when Tomaszewski said loving and adoring is pretty much the same thing? Lois Lane loves and adores Clark Kent. Muslims love and adore the one true God. Unitarian Pharisees, basically we could say they have the same position as the Muslims. It's a Unitarian position, fundamentally, essentially. Oh, let's see. Remember when he said that they can love God, they adore him? You do not have the love of God in you. And he tried to say, well, they don't have the love of God in them, but they love God. The passage means you don't actually love God. This is so stupid. We have to get into this like sophistry with these people. This is, I mean, Thomism is a religion of sophistry. This is a giant construct of made up sophistry. Every angle of it is another level of it. And again, I put this in here because most of the time, at least in the case of Trent, I don't know about Tomaszewski, but remember Trent Horn? These people, these biblically ignorant people, don't even know that Jesus is the God of the Old Testament, that he's the angel of the Lord who made himself known to Abraham as Yeshua. In Zechariah 3, it's Yeshua who's present. The angel of the Lord, the high priest Yeshua, that's telling you who this is. So let's hammer this home with the Unitarian Pharisaic Judaism position, which is basically the same Unitarian position we'll say of Islam. Was that good enough to attain to God the Father, to get you to worship and adore God the Father? The Pharisees said, we aren't illegitimate children. We have one God, the Father. Now remember, this is closer on the spectrum than Muslims. Muslims do not believe the one God is the Father. Jews believe the one God is the Father. But it's not good enough. Even believing closer to our position than the Muslims, who reject that Allah is Father, doesn't get you anywhere. It's not good enough. We are not illegitimate children. We have one God, the Father. Jesus says, if he were, you would love me, because I came from him. I do not come on my own. He sent me. Why can't you understand what I'm saying? It's because you can't accept my words. You are from your father, the devil. You chose to do his desires. He was a murderer from the beginning. Jesus said, if I glorify myself, then my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he's your God, though you don't know him, and he's not your God. Muslims don't know him. He's not your God. The Muslim position is even further away by rejecting Father. Do you idiots not see this? And then he says, I am. Jesus in this passage says, the one that you think you're worshiping in the Old Testament is me. Before Abraham was, I am. In other words, I am in the bush. I'm the one talking out of the bush, me. Then they wanted to stone him because they understood what he meant. They understood he's saying the referent is him, not a generic unity, not a generic father, not a generic non-father of Islam. Islam is a religion premised on Nestorian and Arian heresies, and that is confirmed in the Oxford Handbook to Islam. This was contested for many years. John Damascus made this up when he said that Arian and Nestorian monks are the source of Muhammad's theology. Oh, well, it turns out we have the Islamic Theology Handbook of Oxford, and on pages 76 and 77, the scholarship says, no, actually it is from Arianism. Actually, John Damascus is vindicated. That's exactly where it's from. So what that means is the Roman Catholics are going to have to say that Arians and Catholics also worship the same God. Jehovah's Witnesses now worship the same God. This is how stupid this is. But when Basil writes against the Eunomians, anybody who's read that would know Basil says, you don't get jack shit, dude. You're out. This is not even equivalent to the pagan guy reasoning on an island about some first cause in Romans 1 and Acts 17, which they all misinterpret, by the way. This is religions post-Christianity that know Christianity, that come out of the ethos of Christianity and Arianism, rejecting Christ and Trinity. So that even further shows their arguments fail. Because if their argument was just, well, what about the pagan guy on the island and he reasons, and which I wouldn't even grant that, but even if I did grant that, that wouldn't apply to Muslims, and it would still prove that the Vatican II documents are false. Islam is premised on rejecting, first of all, the deity of Christ, that Christ is God, and that he is the second person of the Trinity. It is premised on rejecting the triad. It is premised on rejecting the Son as the creator, which John 1 and Hebrews 1 say. So they do not, in fact, worship and serve the creator. Remember, Romans 1 was supposed to be their natural theology passage. Paul says that the pagans were supposed to worship and serve the creator, Romans 1, Acts 17. Oh, but wait a minute. Jesus is the creator, and they don't worship Jesus, so they don't worship and serve the creator. They serve the creature. And again, Allah is the creator. In Islam, that means a different thing, you idiots. Just because it's the same word concept fallacy, doesn't mean the same thing in two different systems. Allah in Islam, traditional Sunni Islam, as creator is directly creating and destroying all things every millisecond. Did you know that? That's occasionalism. That's what they mean by creator, you idiots. By creator, they mean he's causing directly all evil events and evil actions, and evil actually has existence in the Quran. Did you know that? This is who you think is the equivalent creator in Christianity, you idiots. Allah, the creator of evil and the occasionalist destroyer and creator of everything at every second. If you don't know what occasionalism is, go look it up. Allah has limited knowledge in 7 places in the Quran, hence Ibn Taymiyyah's whole argument. Allah's got to get them daily downloads of the new info because he's not actually omniscient. Islam is premised on rejecting that Allah is the Father. Allah is not Father, has no Son, and the Quran explicitly says in, see which section it is. An-Nisa, people of the book, do not say anything about Allah except truth. The Messiah is a messenger. He is a spirit created by command from Allah. Do not say Trinity. Allah is not Trinity. I'm reading the Quran, you idiots. These people are actually arguing that. I mean, it's baffling that we have to argue this. I don't even understand why we have to argue this. This just blows me away. They still worship the one true God. It's still the Trinity, even though they reject the Trinity. Do you remember me? I asked in the debate, I said, so Jake rejects the Trinity, but he still worships the Trinity. Yes. I mean, these people are insane, man. This is the darkness and the delusion that this gay cult of Rome gets you. And I don't even, I mean, the only way to be this insane is to have your mind darkened by being some kind of gay dude. I don't even understand. Like, why else would you even want to be in this dumb cult with this stuff? Unless you're yourself some kind of sicko. So, Islam is apostasy from Christ, according to the medieval popes. It is antichrist. It is demon worship. It is an infidel reprobate faith. It is faithless. And so it fails to attain to the true worship and adoration of the one God by rejecting the Son. And of course, 1 John 2:23, 2:22-23, which is the passage that they would not even look at. Did you notice they looked away from the screen when I brought this up? These people hate divine revelation and what's true. They literally looked away when I brought this up. And I asked them to read it and exposit the passage for me. And they wouldn't do it. Because they hate it. Because this refutes them. They are Antichrist. This is Antichrist. One who denies Father and Son. No one who denies Son has Father. Everyone who confesses the Son has the Father. Did you notice? They refused to talk about divine revelation because they hate it. They worship their idol systems of the Pope and their fat dumb ox Thomas Aquinas. That's their religion. That's their God. Their mental conceptual schemes that they worship. Their Summa Theologica. That's their deity. They are idolaters. That's why they push idolatry to be equivalent to the worship of the one true God. Thus, they lose their mind when I bring this up because this truth destroys their nonsense. It cuts right through all their bullshit. Remember what we just saw. about the papacy in the Middle Ages. Calling for crusades? If you don't exterminate, you won't have your sins forgiven. Have you forgotten this already? It was not even that long ago, guys. Pope Urban II, Council of Clermont. If you die fighting the Muslim, your sins are forgiven. Now, because of the documents of Vatican II, which are magisterial, we can go pray in the mosques towards Mecca. We can pray in the synagogues now. The ancient canons of the church, Apostolic Canon 64 and the canons of Trullo, in the first millennium of Christianity, excommunicate any clerics praying and attending synagogues and mosques. This is because, as Aquinas correctly says in Summa Theologica 2:212, to pray at Muslim sites or to partake of the rites of other religions demonstrates the inner disposition of apostasy. I could think of no greater example other than perhaps the papacy making temporal supremacy necessary for salvation, and then that being discarded at Vatican II through all of the religious liberty stuff. This is probably the next biggest contradiction. If I was to pick out two big ones, this is it. Now, what has the papacy even recently said, even within a few decades prior to Vatican II? John Paul II says in his homily to Jordanians, God bless you all, Jordan. May Saint John the Baptist protect Islam and the people of Jordan. Now, lying Roman Catholics read this and said, oh, you don't want to pray for the people of Jordan. How dare you? You liars. Why are you people so dishonest? You know that the problem passage is not praying for the people of Jordan, you liars. The problem passage is St. John the Baptist, please protect Antichrist religion. Please protect demonic Muhammad. That's the problem, you liars. You all lie. You're scumbags. And you know it. And that's why many of you are Skittles. You're immoral. You're blinded and deceiving liars. Because I show you the passage and you immediately lie. Because you do what your father does. You do the very things that the Pharisees in John 8 do. Showing who you actually worship. Showing who the papacy actually worships. When the papacy turns towards Mecca, Thomas Aquinas is right that they're apostates and they worship Satan. And let's turn their dumbass argument around on them. Even though the referent is, quote, Jesus, they're actually attaining to the worship of Satan. Because they've joined themselves with the spirit of Antichrist, which the medieval popes correctly said Muhammad is spirit of Antichrist. He is an Antichrist. And so you worship together with Antichrist. Congratulations. And that's why you act like scumbags. Because you are inner scumbags. You're evil. You're evil idolaters joined with Antichrist. And you literally sit here defending this insanity. Again, John Paul II. May John the Baptist protect Islam. This should be all you need if you were honest with yourself. Let's compare this to only a couple decades later, an entire encyclical written against this nonsense from Pius XI. Thus, this being so, it is clear the Apostolic See cannot on any terms take part in the assemblies of non-Catholics. This is what he's talking about. It would be iniquitous. It would be a surrendering and a compromising of the truth to partake in the religious rites and assemblies of non-Christian sects and religions and non-Catholic sects and religions. You understand that when he wrote this, he was only talking about Protestant ecumenism. He wasn't even thinking of praying in the mosque towards Mecca, you idiots. That's light years beyond what Pius XI even had in his mind. He's saying we can't go pray with Baptists and Anglicans. We can't go in their services. Paragraph 10. It is clear why the Apostolic See never allows its subjects to take part in the assemblies of non-Catholics. Look at that. You lying, deceiving Catholics. Look at that. And Pius XI is not an outstanding example, some lone nut. He's reflecting the same post-Tridentine, pre-Vatican II teaching of all of these popes. It's the same stuff reflected in all of this. Note also that, no, I don't care, nobody cares what.
Well, that's not an infallible document.
Guess what? If he says the Holy See always forbade this practice, and it's on faith and morals, that's universal ordinary magisterium, you idiots. According to your system. The God of the Old Testament, as our great theologian St. Maximus the Confessor said very clearly, is the Trinity. Abraham was taught the Trinity. This means that Trent Horn and Trent Doughboy, or whatever his name was, and all these other idiots are automatically canceled. They're automatically done. The natural theology, it's out. Because natural theology is premised on the idea that the Old Testament is revealing a Unitarian God. Remember, this was all Trent Horn's argument. This is the main reason why everyone thought he lost the debate. One of the main reasons with me. Guess what? Vatican II is the same natural thing. Trent's just being faithful to his Vatican II documents. God appeared to Abraham, who was perfect in knowledge and already possessed an intellect completely beyond matter and figurations. God taught him that the immaterial principle of the Trinity inheres in the principle of unity. And for this reason, God appeared to him as three and spoke as one. That's talking about God having the meal. What God? Jesus eating with Abraham. The Roman Catholics don't even know these basics. I brought up biblical basics to this guy, and he laughs and screams and wants to fight. When his own saints, this is a doctor in their own church, teaches what I'm saying. For those of you that are worried, the new computer arrives in a few days. So all of these latency problems, hopefully, will vanish soon. Is J. Dyer Roman Catholic? You must be joking. Are you serious? What have we been talking about for 2 hours? Steve McLovin, $2. Reconquista was for nothing, according to Vatican II. Yeah, why have martyrs if we're all worshiping the same God? H. Brosy, $5. Somebody in the chat said, how do you get challenged to fight so often? It's hilarious. Not arguments, they just want celebrity boxing matches. Yeah, well, I mean, it was obvious meltdown. He didn't have anything else. G26, $2. J.U. Cooked, Clark Trent, the Superman Scholar. Nick RB, $10. The Superman analogy echoed Rome's syncretism, where Zeus was Jupiter by another name. Catholics end up arguing like ancient pagans when they miss the relevance of Christ's divinity. Exactly. Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. So that's where we learn that, oh, God is actually Jesus. It's not a Unitarian generic deity, and Abraham didn't worship a Unitarian generic deity. Iconomat, $5. Trent seems like Brandon Robertson's psyop into Rome. I don't know who Brandon Robertson is. Joe Suarez, $5. I've seen Pastor Vlad Savchuk say, God's covenant with Abraham still covers Israel today. Is this true? Not the modern nation state of Israel. I mean, Jews will eventually convert according to most of the church fathers in Romans 11. But that's not the same as the modern nation state of Israel. H. Brazi, I'm patting myself and anybody in the chat for calling Cameron out as a snake for years. I've never trusted Cameron. I haven't either, but I did want to do the debate. H. Brazi, $5. The Dyer Council advised you to follow through with the Tim Gordon debate. He was always an honest guy. He must be converted. I'm only going to do it if it's on a big channel. Well, I mean, Tim wants that too, so. John Kell, $20. The problem for the Roman Catholics is spiritual, Jay. Exactly what I said in the debate. They scoffed at it because they're too academic and intellectual to hear that the real problem is actually spiritual. But that's the point of today's discussion. Top Jackmatic, $10. It's unfortunate that Cameron didn't back you up given the DMs. Well, I don't think Cameron is an honest, but I think he's a slime ball. Jordan Lofgren, $5. Notice how they always frame it like Muslims worship the Christian God, not that Christians worship the Muslim God. They don't even buy into it themselves. Fair question. Dr. Alex Stavrianodakis, $20. This is awesome, Jay. Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much, dog. Cody R., $20. They tried to say that Muslims worship other entities early on in its development. That would actually cancel out his argument that Muhammad got God as a referent from the Old Testament revelation. Remember when he argued that? That's in the clip, the clip that I put up. So if that's the case, then that cancels out when he tries to argue that early Muslims worshipped demons, later Muslims worship Allah, which is so stupid. The Pope in the Middle Ages refers to them worshiping demons. He's talking about Allah. Exactly. That's why it was such a massive fumble when Tomaszewski thought that medieval popes were the early phase of Islam. The debate was already, that was the beginning of the collapse right there. $20 CK. I was surprised Roman Catholics didn't want to defend the magisterium. Why would they? This is one of the best arguments. Of course they want to go into linguistic reference and semantic theories, anything to get away from magisterial contradictions, which, by the way, the audience resonated with what we argued. And I knew that. I knew the audience was going to resonate with me showing you the Vatican II dogmatic statements versus the medieval papal dogmas and teachings. And I was correct, and that's why the audience, 98% in the comments, at least earlier today, were that these idiots fumbled massively. Roman Catholics maybe are beginning to realize that they can't. That apple-smacking idiot was insufferable. Roll stakes, $5. Superman, Lois Lane. Oh, we read that already. Dixie Fiend, $5. Catholics appeal to Marvel multiverse fallacies. Exactly. Allah is just another acceptable spin-off character for their Funko Pop superhero. Yeah, exactly. Emilion, $20. Jay exercised patience under all those insults from Trent. That's admirable. Well, you notice that anytime that I do something positive by God's grace, that's ignored and forgotten. But if I ever even slightly stub my toenail, it's the end of the world, and I'm the most evil, mean guy. And so, yeah, it's a selective evidence and selective proofs of meanness. Adam Crazy, $5. Clark Kent and Superman have the same attributes. Allah and Christ do not. Their analogy doesn't even work. Beautifully said. Made by Jim Bob, $10. The Superman analogy exposes the confusion between Clark Kent, a person, and human as a category that persons are in. Another interesting angle. There's people have been just really going off on this. I didn't even really, honestly, in the debate, all I wanted to do was get this magisterial point out. And so when I realized that Cameron was acting like I didn't in the DM specify that that's what I'm going to debate, I just tuned out because I'm like, all right, well, all I care about is getting the magisterial argument out. It was obvious to the audience that they weren't going to address it. So then they tried to spin it into me coming and bringing an irrelevant topic, and they got caught lying about that. So that just doubles I mean, that's why I'm telling you guys, like, you're dealing with disingenuous bad faith people. That's what I'm saying. Ortho Tokos $5. Would Roman Catholics have to concede that Muhammad was referring to the Christian God when God showed up, showing him Aisha in a dream? Ooh. Exactly. Good point. Yeah, these arguments were kryptonite to their gay Superman shit. I'll tell you that right now. More like super gay, not Superman. Harry spent us $5. You nailed it. Roman Catholics no longer have a leg to stand on. Pink unicorn, $7. Sam thinks that a pink unicorn is the same God of the Bible. I'm not kidding. Yeah, I saw his comment. This is what terminal papism looks like. Swipe right for your receipts. Yeah, exactly. I wish you'd put that on. I can't get that link out of Streamlabs, but I did see Shamoon saying that. And he's basically saying the same thing that these goobers are saying, right? Now, we got a couple more things I want to get to from Denzinger because we didn't even get to that, which I thought is a relevant argument. Let's see. Let's go to Denzinger, and I want you to see 17... Let's start with 1966 in Denzinger first. And we'll work our way back. You know what? Another thing I'm thinking about in regard to this. What happened to the camera? The battery died. Can you guys hear me? I forgot to plug the battery in. All right, give me one just 1 second. We'll open it up here to calls in a second here. I'm almost done with the information. I've actually got a lot more, though. Okay. All right, so we're going to look real quick here at Denzinger 1966. There's not a whole lot of these, just a few of them. We'll see how many I can get through here. Okay. Whether a missionary, this is 1898, responses to the Holy Office under the Pope in Denzinger. Can a missionary confer baptism on a Mohammedan at the point of death who, in his errors, he supposes to be in good faith? The answer is, if he has his full faculties, only by exhorting him to sorrow and confidence, not by speaking about our mysteries for fear that he will believe them. Whatever his faculties are, by saying nothing to him, since these are the possibilities they're listing here, and we'll get to the reply. Should we say nothing to him? Should we not talk about our mysteries? If he's lost his faculties, should we not baptize him if we not do anything? Reply to 1 and 2, no. You may not confer baptism only because of talking about sorrow and confidence. It is not permitted to administer baptism absolutely or conditionally to Mohammedans, as the decree of the Holy Office was already given in Denzinger 1349. So let's go to Denzinger 1349. Concerning the truths, this is key. This is under Pope Clement XI in 1700 to 1721. Pope Clement XI determined what is necessarily to be believed explicitly. And the reason this matters is that at this time, this is when the Roman Catholic Church is determining and stating, due to these specific questions about Mohammedans, what things are necessary to have the faith to be baptized. So this is what's the absolute minimum, according to Rome, for a Muslim to be baptized to say that he, quote, has the faith, right? For example, you might think, well, does he have to memorize the creed? Does he have to start reading the Gospels? What are the two basics? Well, guess what? Rome has an answer. Whether a minister is bound before baptism is conferred on an adult to explain all the mysteries of the faith, especially if he's on the point of death, because if we explain all of the mysteries, it might disturb his mind. Or is it sufficient if a person is at the point of death, if he promises, if he recovers from the illness, to be instructed, that we might just go ahead and baptize him? A promise to learn the faith if you get better is not sufficient. But now wait a minute. Why would it not be sufficient if Muslims and Christians and Jews all worship the same God and adore him? It ought to be sufficient because the referent just is God. Oh, but wait a minute. To have the faith, it is necessary that two mysteries be conveyed to them, namely the Trinity and the Incarnation. So even in traditional Tridentine Roman Catholicism, post-Trent, a Muslim can't just be baptized because he believes in Allah, even if he's interested in Catholicism or he wants to be baptized. If Muslims worshipped and adored the one true God, via even what Vatican II says, there's no reason why they couldn't be baptized. Unless, even in the 1700s, the Roman Catholic Church still noted that to have the faith, you must at least have a belief in the Trinity and the Incarnation. Then you can be baptized. Now, do any of these Roman Catholics even go into Denzinger? I mean, seriously, when was the last time a Roman Catholic even cited Denzinger? Maybe Scott Hahn, or maybe some scholar in a paper. Have you ever seen? Maybe they do. I don't watch these goobers. Do they ever even go into Denzinger? They're clowns, dude. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Leather Daddy does. I don't watch his gay live chat. So somebody help me if they do, because I will be impressed if any of them ever even cite Denzinger. If they do, I would be impressed. I mean, when was the last time any of those goobers cited Denzinger 1349 under Pope Clement XI, answering what's necessary for Muslims to have the faith? So if that's necessary to have the faith, the Trinity and the Incarnation, then you can baptize a Muslim. Then Vatican II's documents are false. They do not have faith in the one God. And I do want to bring up the well-known classic. Everybody's familiar with this, but it is worth bringing back up because it reminds us of the attitude that the Roman Catholic Church had at the Council of Florence, which is, again, very obviously contradictory to Vatican II. What does Denzinger 7:14, which is the classic Cantate Domino section? The Roman Church firmly believes and professes and proclaims that those not living within her. Now, who makes up the category of those not within her? I wonder. How many Roman Catholic specious, sophistical arguments can we get to get around this clear statement? Those not within the Catholic Church, not only pagans, but Jews, heretics, and schismatics. Oh, well, Muslims too, by the way, because they were just called in the previous century infidel demon worshippers. They cannot become participants in eternal life, and they will be damned in the lake of fire unless, before the end of their life, they are added to the flock. What flock? Any flock? Protestant flock? Evangelicals? Mormons? The flock that's explained right here of the ecclesiastical body of the Roman Church, aka the papal flock, and do the works of the Roman Church and its fastings and whatever they do. even if he be a martyr for Christ. Look at this. The Roman Church at Cantate Domino rejects that you can be a Coptic martyr, an Orthodox martyr, a Nestorian Syriac martyr outside of the Roman Church, unless before the end of your life you are joined to the papacy. That's what this clear as day says. The bosom and unity of the Roman Church, not Sam Shamoun's made up apostolic church. The Roman Church, which at this time was certainly not in, quote, half communion with the Assyrian Church of the East or anyone else. I mean, just the idea that they come up with this idea of half communion. And by the way, how do I know that? Because this is the decrees for the separated Easterns. It literally says right after this, the decrees for the Syrians, the Chaldeans, the Maronites, the Armenians. In other words, everyone in schism in these groups is damned, even if you're a martyr for Jesus. Remember all the Coptics coming after me? And they love Rome because they're all ecumenists. So they hate us because we're not ecumenists. Your own Roman buddies, your own butt buddies in Rome, literally said the same thing that I say at the Council of Florence. They changed their doctrine. They lied and changed it at Vatican II to where now Muslims are part of the plan of salvation and worship the same God. How can you be honest with yourself and not say that Cantate Domino 7:14 is night and day with what Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium 16 say? And do Roman Catholics even know about Cantate Domino? I learned about this right when I became a Roman Catholic. This is one of the first things I learned about in 2003 when I became a Roman Catholic. I learned about what's this Cantate Domino and this strong statement of extra ecclesiam nulla salus. Okay. I had several notes also on the types of things that we see in Garaby. I did want to note one last point about, and there's a lot more that we could go into in Denzinger, but I mean, this is good enough, I think. This, by the way, you can easily read the John Paul. People are like, where is this? Where is this John Paul? Like I made this up. Like John Paul, like you couldn't literally just type in, may St. John the Baptist protect Islam and get his freaking homily right here. So I will link that right here. Now, another reason why it's so important to prove that it's the Trinity and it's Christ in the Old Testament is that immediately cancels out Islam. As you guys know from all the debates that we've been doing with the Muslims for the last 7 years, whether it's Sheikh Rashid or Nazam Ghaffur, or whether it's Paul Williams, or whether it's Daniel Hakikachu or Jake or any of them, their first presupposition is that the God of the Old Testament is a Unitarian deity, which is the very thing that these idiot Roman Catholics think, by the way, many of them. Very few of them actually think that it's actually the Trinity in Christ, because they're all confused. They don't. The other thing is that, have you noticed Roman Catholics don't like biblical theology? There's a handful of them that do. Okay, Scott Hahn does. Yeah, wow, so what? The rest of them, they're idiots. They don't know anything about the Bible. All they care about is their idol, Thomas Aquinas, or whatever other weird thing that they're obsessed with, like their orgiastic, histrionic women saints, whatever weird fetish they have. They don't care what the Bible says. But the Bible is important because that's actually the divine revelation, at least the written form, right? And we all agree it's not going to contradict, unless you're just a brain-dead Roman Catholic who thinks that it does. It's important to point out that so many of these theophanies are graphic in what they describe. I don't mean it in a sexual way. I mean in the way that they describe what God's doing. In Genesis 18:1, it says, Yahweh, Yehovah, appeared to Abraham in the plains of Mamre as he Abraham sat at the tent. Okay. And lo, Abraham looked up, raised his eyes, and saw 3 men standing there, one of whom is Yahweh Jehovah. Interesting. So God literally appears, stands there in front of Abraham, and they have a meal. The thing that Trent Doherty didn't even know what this was. I brought this up. He had no knowledge. It's like he didn't even know about the meal with Abraham. And had we gone into it, I had all these tabs up to say, you understand, this is saying Yahweh stands there in front of him. Abraham looks up with his eyes and sees Yahweh as the form of a man. How is that possible? And the whole point of this is that these idiots reject theophanies, you see. That's what we're talking. These are all of this is the destruction of their stupid system, if they think about it for a minute. Because if these theophanies are Jesus, and they are, then it's Jesus in the Old Testament, and the whole Unitarian natural theology thesis falls away. And by the way, so does Muhammad's idea that the referent in the Old Testament is, quote, God, the God of the Jews. The true God, God of the Jews, in these passages is Jesus. That's the point. That's why this destroys all of these heretics, whether it's Trent Horn, whether it's the other Trent, or whether it's any of these other goobers. What did I argue to Daniel Hakikachu that is the exact identical refutation of these idiots? And they are idiots. They're lazy, ignorant idiots. And that's why they hate going to divine revelation so much. They will go anywhere but to what the scriptures say. And I will give credit to the Protestants for recognizing this. When you read through the comments, many Protestants noted, wait a minute, why is the Orthodox guy really wanting to go to the scriptures here? Why is it the Roman Catholics consistently hate going to the scriptures? They'll talk about anything but going to the scriptures. Because they don't believe it. That's why. They don't really believe with the script. That's why. Know ye not the scriptures? What does Jesus say to the Pharisees? They're Pharisees. And it's the same debate. I'm having the same debate Jesus has with the Pharisees in John 5-9. And these idiots are literally representing the Pharisee position, and they don't even know it. They can't even see it. Because they don't read the scriptures. Hence why Jesus says to the Pharisees, do you know ye not the scripture? You don't even know the scriptures?
Religion, whether Islam or Christianity, actually has continuity with the religion.
Now, this is important because this shows, wait a minute, Old Testament Judaism isn't Unitarian. Guess what? Modern Jews admit this. Did you know that? Did you know that modern Jewish scholarship is increasingly admitting, whether it's Somers, Schaeffer, Buyarin, Siegel, Gershom Scholem? Oh, wait a minute, they're admitting this point. Why? Because they aren't interested in rabbinic Talmudic traditions. They're in academia. They don't have a bias. I mean, they have some bias, but they don't have some specific bias to prop up Unitarian Maimonidean Judaism. And they can look at the text, as Somers does, who is, I think, a textual liberal, and he says, well, it clearly says in Judges that Yahweh turned his face to Gideon. Yeah, exactly. Which refutes the idea that it's a creature and the Thomistic idea that theophanies are creatures. Or the idiotic natural theology idea that it's not Jesus in the Old Testament, as these heretics say.
That's late.
Did nobody read St. Justin versus Trypho? These idiots are making the same arguments as Trypho. Roman Catholics make the Trypho argument.
Down in the law and the prophets. And that image there, we're not going to go too deep into it right now, but we'll get into it here in a little bit. And I might go back and forth between screen share and some of the stuff I've got over here to show. The first question I would ask in regard to this debate is, how would a seventh...
Now, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit to get past the Muslim part, because the purpose of showing this is to point out, and by the way, remember when I brought this up, the Muslims were too stupid to even understand what I was arguing? They thought I was arguing that Jews are Trinitarians. No, I'm saying that Jewish scholarship is admitting that 1st, 2nd, 3rd century Judaism was not unilaterally Unitarian. It was all over the place.
There's no light in them. The next thing that has to be shown, which may cause some people some surprise, is that the Old Testament prophets were Trinitarian. They were not Unitarian. Judaism, specifically in the Second Temple period, was not a monolithic Unitarian enterprise. The question...
Did you hear that? These idiot Muslims, when I made this argument, turned around and said, so you're saying that they believe in the Trinity, that the Jews believe in the Trinity. Did I say that? I said they were not totally monolithically Unitarian. And that's what the Jewish scholars say that I cite here.
Becomes, what are the teachings of the prophets in the Old Testament? Did they actually teach, as Islam says, a radical Unitarianism? Or is it something more fluid, or is there differentiation in Yahweh? In fact, modern Jewish scholarship unanimously is undecided on this question. There's a lot of Jewish scholarship that is listed here. For example, Daniel Boyarin. Later, I have Sommer and I have Siegel. And they admit that in the Old Testament itself, not due to Christian deviation, but in the Old Testament itself, we find many, many passages that show differentiation in Yahweh. That differentiation is not just located in rabbinic debates, it also continues in...
Why are we showing this? Because this demonstrates that, according to their argumentation, and even Trent's argumentation in the debate, that Muhammad is pulling from Judaic Unitarianism. Oh, but wait a minute. If Judaic theology is not Unitarian, then that falls apart, because that means Muhammad should have been Trinitarian, and he's not. And again, Islam and the Muslims think they're restoring the true monotheism of the Old Testament. That's why it's so devastating to demonstrate that the Old Testament is not Unitarian to them. That means the whole project fails. That means Muhammad is not a prophet in continuity with the Old Testament, because the prophets are teaching Trinitarianism, not Unitarianism. Therefore, Muhammad is a false prophet, because it's a different God. Muhammad is calling you to other gods. Deuteronomy 13, Deuteronomy 18. That's why this argument is so devastating. And it's not just devastating to the Muslims, but it's devastating to their butt buddies, the Roman Catholics, who have the same position.
To later medieval debates with Jewish Kabbalah. And you can see there, for example, Gershom Scholem in his book on Kabbalah. He's the respected Kabbalist theologian of the Middle Ages, or scholar of medieval Kabbalah. He points out, for example, the 3 beginningless lights that are mentioned. Now, I'm not a Kabbalist. I'm just pointing out that this shows that the Jewish tradition is not monolithic in its presentation. So I'd like to come back then to my screen, to me here, and point out that the first display of Trinitarian theology in the Law and the Prophets is, for example, here on this whiteboard. And I'm showing this whiteboard because, hopefully you guys can see this. You can screenshot.
Right, I tried to fit this on here, but it doesn't. All the passages are not exactly there. But this is just a smattering of theophanies and Trinitarian references in the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Okay, so I'm going to skip past that and get back to this point here.
And points out that the triad there, I don't mean to argue either that the Old Testament explicitly uses the words triad. No, all that's necessary, as the Jewish scholars are admitting, is that the Old Testament believers spoke of Father, Angel of the Lord, or Son of Man, and the Spirit in a real distinctive way, and they do. Although many in modernity assume that the Law and the Prophets were strictly Unitarian, Jewish scholar Daniel Boyarin notes that early Christianity actually represents a conservative form of Judaism that sought to remain faithful to the totality of revelation in the Law and the Prophets, including the texts which portray differing hypostases in God. Another example of this is recent Jewish scholarship on divine fluidity and divine embodiment in the law and the prophets. Now, again, I'm not Jewish. I'm just pointing out that the admissions of Jewish scholarship are to our position nowadays. We are in the Jewish Gospels. The story of the Jewish Christ notes, for example, just from the from the text of Daniel 7, we have the discussion of the Messiah being divine, the Messiah being in human form, the Messiah appearing as younger than the Ancient of Days, the divinity of Ancient of Days. We have the Messiah appearing eventually enthroned upon high and being given dominion and authority over earth. That is the ascension and Christian theology. Now, early on in the early days of Christianity, there were already rabbinical debates before Christianity and rabbinic Judaism completely parted ways, where you even have people like famous rabbis like Rabbi Akiva, for example, admitting that there is multiplicity in some sense in the Godhead. This is covered in Alan Siegel's Two Powers in Heaven and in Schaeffer's Two Gods in Heaven. Now, God is a generic term that can pick out a specific hypostasis, and it can also pick out a generic nature. So when it says two gods or two powers, it's not indicating polytheism. It's merely indicating differentiation in the text. Now, again, I'm not arguing for Kabbalah. I'm just pointing out as an example that rabbinic Judaism is not a monolithic Unitarian philosophy. As Summer notes, this is a later Maimonidean feature and not a Kabbalistic or early Christian Judaic feature. Second Temple Judaism and Christian in Jewish scholarship was not monolithic. It was not radical Unitarian. It was fluid, and it did not admit God to be multiple due to later accretions. In fact, Siegel and Summers and other admit that you can have a multiplicity of personae in early Jewish theology without that necessitating, for example, multiple wills. This is also seen in the process of the rabbis in their eventual exclusion of logos theology, which is not a direct import from Hellenism per se, but rather from the wisdom text of the Old Testament, the Solomonic literature, and so forth. Jewish scholars like Simeon Halevi, Sholem, Boyarin, Siegel, and Summer admit that rabbinical dialogues and debates on the wisdom logos text and the Merkabah chariot mysticism that draws from both the Psalms, Ezekiel, Daniel, and Enochic literature all posit various divine embodiments, manifestations, and even incarnation. In fact, ancient rabbinical dialogues discuss the divine Messiah suffering, dying, and perhaps even atoning. One example is Rabbi Hagalili in Boyarin's Jewish Gospels discussing the atoning death. And then my friend, the Jewish Messianic Christian Ken Ami, has a book, The Jewish Messiah is a Judaism versus Judaism debate. Again, just illustrating that Judaism is not a monolithic enterprise. Now, as we get back to embodiment, Jewish scholar Benjamin Summer notes in his Law and the Prophets that they themselves, in many texts that I cited in my big whiteboard there, display what he calls fluidity of Yahweh's ability to be both immanent and transcendent, as well as manifesting at certain times and in certain places in special modes and in special presences. This does not entail or necessitate a change in Yahweh's essence.
Notice that this is directly antithetical to the metaphysical philosophical dogmas of Thomism 101. God is reduced to absolute simplicity and actus purus such that he cannot manifest in time and space. This is why Thomists and most Roman Catholics reject the theophanies being really God in time and space, and rather some sort of created emissary or a created light. This is their position. Notice that it is the opposite of the Hebrew revelation, as we see here.
Or nature, but rather that he's able to be embodied or to manifest in various and distinct ways. Summer even admits the dispute, again, was not over a strict numerical oneness, because many people in the ancient world did not always count by strict identity, but rather by division. Whether this distinction, the hypostasis, allow for multiple wills is the real issue, according to Summer, and that, of course, is something that Trinitarians reject. We do not believe in multiple wills in the Godhead. Summer cites many of the holy places and iconography replete throughout the Old Testament law and prophets, including altar stones, trees, which are dedicated to Yahweh. They're made holy in anticipation of the temple and tabernacle liturgical services, which will also embody Yahweh above the ark, the Shekinah, and so forth, the cloud, while at the same time not embodying the divine essence or in any way altering Yahweh.
Oh, that's the essence energy distinction from the Hebrew revelation. the metaphysics of the God of the Hellenic Roman Catholic philosophers is not the personal Yahweh who manifests in time and space, standing like a man at the tabernacle, eating a meal with Abraham. That's an offense to the philosopher-minded idiots in Rome. How could God be in time and space and have a meal? God is an absolutely simple monad. It's because you don't have God. It's because you don't understand that the I am is a person. I am he. It's not a I am monad. I am essence.
This, as a side note, the Quran also appears to have inadvertently left these references to this special presence in texts like Surah 671 to 80, 1171 to 5128. Now, the challenge then, as I would put it to Dan.
Okay, so that's enough of that. You get the point that this refutes Islam and the Thomistic idiotic position of these people at the same time. Now, I also wanted to stress that he didn't even seem to be aware that the New Testament teaches, the Trent dude, the New Testament teaches that every time Old Testament prophets were speaking, who was it speaking through them? Oh, the Spirit of Christ. So every psalm David wrote, he wrote by the Spirit of Jesus, according to Peter in 1 Peter 1:11. And this goober said, he didn't know Jesus. Jesus was a first century Jewish Palestine rabbi. That ain't the angel of the Lord. No, it is Jesus. And that's why you're not in the faith. That's why you're heterodox. Orbo Bro. Rebuke Roman Catholic claims that sincerely Muslims worship God. Yes, we are doing that. Banana Chan, $5. Do you recommend telling friends and family about Bitcoin? I'm worried that they won't listen. Well, just tell them, and then when they don't listen, remind them, and then eventually. So the way this works is they don't ask about Bitcoin until it's at a cycle top. And so then that's the worst time to buy, but might as well just tell them. Actually, it's never a bad time to buy. So, well, Emmanuel, 100 Mexicans. Let me tell you about my neighbor, Clark. I read about him in a Superman comic book. They got him all wrong. Roman Catholics confirm that I'm talking about Clark because it's the same comic book. David Hawk, $10. Trent's argument rests on the claim that Islam is based on Jewish Christian revelation. Exactly, but it's not. I mean, it claims to be, but it's not. In reality, Islam is a combination of Arab folklore, Christian paganism. It's Gnostic, Talmudic, pagan, and Old Testament texts and beliefs all mixed into a hodgepodge. The only people who say this just don't even understand Islam. H. Brazi, $5. To be fair, I was talking trash back to the Roman Catholics, but if he's allowing them to disrespect you while debating, he should be able to go back and forth. I don't know. Did you get banned or something? You shouldn't get banned. Ismail Solorio, $5. Jay, I love your channel. How can I join your members on YouTube? You just go to the tab for members and you click join, or it should be on the front page of my channel. I don't ever see that, well, I guess I could sign out of my channel and see it. Is the only way for me to really see that, but like it should be right here. See this tab, memberships? It should be that right there. Members. And then you can come over here, and this is all members content here. You can also sign up at the website too. It's basically the same price, but obviously there's more stuff on the website because over here on YouTube I got we were demonetified. We were demoneyfied for about 5 years over here. So Julian, $10. Premise 1, the Trinity is God. Premise 2, Muslims do not worship the Trinity. Therefore, Muslims don't worship God. I think ultimately it is this simple, and they just want to play a bunch of games to make this papal nonsense work. Make the heart of these papists dull and their ears heavy and shut their eyes. Yeah, exactly. They're essentially just Talmudists. Smoothie, $5. Can I get a tattoo in Orthodoxy? I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it, but I wouldn't do it. Jaguar $3, just because I'm not into tattoos. That's all. Jaguar $3. Why is it that Hindus don't worship the true God? Well, Vatican II says they do. So, for Hindus, Brahman is the supreme, ultimate reality, eternal, unchanging, infinite, source, goal, purpose, etc. Well, I think that's the reasoning of Vatican II, is that potentially it is kind of almost a monotheism as well. Bergen $5. Jay, I used to be a Muslim. I've been thinking about becoming Catholic Orthodox. Honestly, Catholics hide the truth like Muslims. No, they act exactly like... Actually, all these groups, that Muslims, Jews, and Roman Catholics, they're all the same. So, and they act the same way. Brandon Greer's $5. Superman fallacy. Ismail Solorio. No, we did that one. Jacob Crocker $5. Why even debate it? They can see that Muslims are burning in hell without Jesus in the opening statement, so it was all redundant. I mean, that's why I said what really matters here is what Vatican II is pushing and the delusion that it's pushing. And then they're like, Vatican II is irrelevant. Oh, okay, so the magisterium of your church is irrelevant? Yes, it is. Zorch $2. We'd be microwaving hot dogs. Panos, $3. What's up, dog? Crazy making from papists and all the bizarre, weak-ass coping, drinking reminds me of gaslighting victims of narcissistic abuse. If you destroy people's ability to perceive reality, yeah, this is really what cults do. And that's exactly what's going on. This is a sad and terrible thing to do to people. Papism is evil. Yeah, it gets people denying reality to maintain the system. It's like this, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but there's this famous thing attributed to Hegel, Hegel supposedly says, my system is like, the ultimate explanation of reality. And one of the students says, well, Hegel, what if there's facts that contradict your system? And Hegel says, if a fact contradicts the system, then the fact be damned, because the system is truth. That's, whether that's true or not, that Hegel said that, it's a perfect description of what's going on here. Gordon Bops, $5. Traditional Catholics will handwave all of this on the basis that Vatican II is promulgated as a pastoral council. Yeah, of course, that's all bullshit, because I have a whole talk and list all the documents that Vatican II is magisterial and it's binding. And I will link that for you right here. If you look at the show description of this video, it shows the documents as well. Oh, I gotta go ahead and go to the calls, because we gotta get up and go to church tomorrow. So I can't do this much longer. Ismail Solorio, $2. Eastern Orthodoxy is growing in Central America. Yeah, I mean, I think, people are going to want authentic stuff, and nobody wants this just gay papal stuff except these internet lunatics. They're the only people that care about this. And all of their insane cult followers. So people are going to want the real thing. And so I say just let them keep being what they are. Because the more that they keep being what they are, which is Antichrist, the more they're going to send people our way. So let them go. Go for it. Accelerate your own accelerationist collapse, Roman Catholics. Have at it. Petty, $10. Clark Kent analogy works with Allah because Allah is the greatest of deceivers. That's exactly what I said. JV Free, blocking is gay, Jay. Then I guess I'm gay because I actually profusely and liberally block people. And your comments were getting super annoying, and don't even bother super chatting because I'm not going to read them anymore. Cody R, $20. They try to say Muslims worship other entities. We read that. Bananatine Emperor. No, that was last live stream. We read that one too. Jake, $20. There was a moment in the belligerent Trent rant that reminded me of a boomer that I met 20 years ago who dropped out of the Jesuit priesthood. He admitted that Aristotelian metaphysics. He admitted the Aristotelian metaphysics of Rome, but says they're all practically atheist. Probably true. Cody, $1. Roman Catholic actually told me Florence doesn't count as a contradiction because it doesn't name Muslims. It doesn't have to, because as we saw in the slides, at that time, the papacy consistently called Muslims pagans and infidels. I told them that the exclusive claims of Cantate Domino were clear. This is the level that we're at. Yeah, I mean, that I had a Roman Catholic tell me that the papacy praying in the mosque towards Mecca doesn't count as apostasy because they didn't actually become Muslims. So to commit apostasy, you have to actually become the religion. So the action of apostasy, so basically, if you want to commit apostasy like 50 times a day, it's not apostasy as long as you just go back to being Roman Catholic. That's so silly this is. But I mean, this is if you ever read rabbinic commentaries and the games that the rabbinical nonsense relies on, these Roman Catholics are identical. They're Talmudic lunatics. They do this. It's the exact same. Banana Teen Emperor $2. New Catholic contradiction unlocked. What's the point of the age of reason for children to receive the Eucharist if it doesn't matter if you know him or not to worship him? Ooh, another thing that we were right about. Exactly. Yeah, if knowing God is not a condition of worshiping and loving him in some specific sense, then there's no reason for children to be denied the Eucharist. Exactly. And why would Muslims be denied baptism without knowing the Trinity and the Incarnation, as the Holy Office and the statements under Pope Clement said that we read? Soul, $10. Catholic teaching saying that Muslims worship God and demons at the same time. By Catholic rules, the older consistent doctrine prevails. Thus, Muslims don't worship the same God, unless Catholics admit the magisterium is incoherent. Well, that's the point. You don't get to pick and choose magisteriums. Remember, they have a show sponsor, which is chalk.com, choq.com. Let's see who's up here. Wisdom. What's up? Unmute. Wisdom, unmute.
Unmuted.
What's on your mind?
I just wanted to run it past you guys about the whole Islam is just Zionism for dummies, what you thought.
Zionism is an atheist political movement. I don't know if I would equate a weird death cult to a kind of an atheist socialist political movement. There would be some overlaps, but I think there's pretty significant differences too. But interesting question. Banana Teen Emperor, what's up?
Hey, what's up, Jake?
What's on your mind?
Yeah, I wanted to call out something that was pretty funny in the whole, Trent being, how do I call it, slimy. So at the beginning of the debate, he very clearly pointed out that he, quote, appreciated the fact that you brought up the papal.
Oh, that's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, and then later he said that the problem with what you're arguing is that you didn't make an argument at the beginning.
Ooh, yeah. Now, wait a minute. I thought he appreciated it, but then it wasn't an argument, so he didn't really appreciate it. So he was being deceptive.
This happens so often in these debates where it's very long, and I get it from your side because it's probably harder to see. But what's really annoying is that people can't follow the entirety of it because they have TikTok brain now, and then they just see the dunking moments, and you don't notice the little things. Did you see how, for example, Michael Lofton just showed that Sam Shamoun's not really Catholic?
No, I don't keep up with Lofton. What do you do?
Well, it's funny. So this is just another example of people not noticing the little things people say. But for example, Sam's been saying for years, the Catholics let him take the Eucharist.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He never says he is taking the Eucharist.
Oh,
in the context. Yeah. You just got to notice the tics that people give off in these debates.
Well, I remember somebody brought it up the other day, how do we even know he even goes to a Catholic church?
Oh yeah, and the thing was basically Sam like just completely flipped out on Michael. So I was curious to see what Michael was saying, and some of Sam's supporters have basically been saying like, "Oh, he's not Catholic," and I'm like, I knew this for like 2 years. He keeps saying, "I take the Eucharist at a Catholic church because they let me." Which, in any context, since he was born at a Syrian Church of the East, you know, he could just have not done it. Like, not done the profession of faith. But anyways, I just want to
Okay, so wait a minute. So I'm confused. So Lofton says Shamoun's not Catholic, and what's the
correct.
argument? What's Lofton's argument that he's not?
One, a bunch of people ended up saying that to him, and two, when you kind of look at the way that Sam phrases everything, he never really explicitly says that he did the profession of faith. He just did and my whole point is basically there's a lot in these long form debates. If you actually pay attention the entire time, every time I've seen you get pissed off, it's actually warranted. Because basically he said he appreciated it and then said you weren't making a real argument. And you showed up with a preparation to the debate. And the guy who is hosting the debate then pretends like the wording he used wasn't extremely ambiguous on the fact that you needed to provide the documents. And I'm like, I just don't understand how anyone can come away from these debates.
Yeah, I mean, Cameron is always. Thank you. Yeah, Cameron has always been slimy. I expected slimy tricks. I just didn't I expect him to act like I didn't mention in the DMs clearly that twice I was going to talk about magisterial statements about Islam from Rome. I mentioned it in the DMs twice. And then today, Cameron gaslights his brain-dead audience by putting the tweets out as if the tweets don't say exactly what I said.
Yeah, it was disgusting. I saw that community post, and my whole point is, I was actually thinking earlier today after you finished that debate, I woke up and it was like last night, and I just go, I don't see how you even want to do this anymore, because I'm not saying I don't want to listen. I just don't want to listen to these debates, because outside of the decent exchange that happened with the Not Father Annihilator, like, we can't get through an hour, 30 minutes without people not seeing basic verbal tick contradictions, and then the comments are insufferable, the reactions are insufferable, and I'm like, I kind of like the Twitter debates more, because like people act like because it's a timed response or anything, like it's better. I'm like, it's not. You guys don't have attention spans.
Right. I agree. Yeah, great points, Benantine. And I agree with you too that probably I mean, I just don't even know how many times do we have to do the papacy debate? I'm not faulting Ubi. Ubi's the best at that. Like, I mean, and it's always the same stuff where they want to get really deep and then people want to bitch and whine and complain and not actually deal with the arguments, like Voice of Reason being like, I don't have the burden of proof. The burden of proof is on you, so we don't have to talk about Catholicism. It's like, no, dude, come on. You got to be talking about Catholicism. It's a debate between two claims about which one is Catholic. So this whole game of like, I don't have the burden of proof, that's just lame debate tactics where people try to get around having to actually, defend anything or argue anything. But that was a really good point, Ben Anatine. I didn't even notice the slimy hypocrisy of him pretending like he really appreciated the arguments that I brought about magisterium. And then later on, he's like, you haven't brought an argument. Syllogism. Anyway, I want to play this little clip of what I thought was a really funny part in the debate.
So, the same way that Lois Lane can refer to and love is very much like worship and adore, right?
What does he say? Love? He says it twice. Love is very much like worship and adore. Let's hear him say it again.
Refer to and love is very much like worship and adore, right? Clark Kent, even though she explicitly rejects that Clark Kent can fly.
Okay, the difference is that the analogy fails because the Muslim knows the Trinity and the Incarnation and the deity of Christ, which are the essential, or some of the essential identifiers, and explicitly says, not that God, not Jesus, not Trinity, not him. That's why this dumb analogy doesn't work.
Now,
Does Jesus
you
say-
tell me what's
Why
supposed to
does
be the
Jesus say
relevant
that
difference between
to the Unitarian Pharisees when he's debating with them, you do not have the love of God and you do not have the Father? What does that
what
mean?
relevance is that? Of what relevance
really?
is that? I'm not answering that question. I'm not answering that question.
Of what relevance is that? So a biblical example of a Unitarian being grilled by Jesus, which fits your perfect case, you're not going to answer it. Exactly. And then he says, I never said love. Really?
Tell me what relevance it has.
You won't
You're
answer the
trying
question
to-
because it refutes the very thing that you just argued.
No, because
Look at this guy. Look at this
there's
demon
no
back here.
relevance.
It's a Unitarian
you won't-
position that's equivalent to Islam. It's the Pharisees who say we have the Father, and Jesus says you do not have the Father, nor do you have the love of God in you. It's in my slides.
And you can refer to and worship
My God,
the
it's in
true
his
God
slides,
without.
You said they have the love of God. Jesus says you do not have the love of God explicitly.
No, I didn't say that.
Yes, you
No, I
did.
didn't
You
say
said that. You said that
No,
he can still
no,
love God.
no,
You said
no,
love and yes, you
no.
did. Love and adore. He said love and adore, and he says no, I didn't say that. Let's go back to the beginning.
The same way that Lois Lane can refer to and love. Love is very much like worship and adore, right? Clark Kent, even though she explicitly rejects that Clark Kent can fly.
And again, loving God, adoring God, worshiping God, they can all be equivalent terms. I mean, this is just such a it ended up being T-dump level stuff. I thought that this was going to be like a high tiered thing, and it was T-dump. Soul. By the way, I didn't see the rest of it after I left, but people were saying that when it was FDA that they actually denied the real presence. I didn't hear this part, but I mean, it doesn't surprise me.
They denied that there was an empirical experience of divinity at like the Eucharist.
So what is the Eucharist if it's not empirical? Is it a mental Eucharist? That's the Protestant position.
Thomas Wesky tried to run into like the whole idea of like what if my empirical experience is of the created accidents, right? So he experiences the taste of the wine and the texture of the bread.
So my body is not partaken of the uncreated energies. Now this is, I mean,
Yeah, I see.
yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
But that was the route they were trying to take there. But so I have a couple of syllogisms that I put together, and I just wanted to, because they're like adamant about wanting syllogisms, which I, to a degree I get. They do help clarify what someone is saying to a degree. But so the first one is an attempt at a counter to Trent's like disagreement argument. So I felt like the conversation between him and Father Deacon Ananias was on like the level of description of a same subject with like different predicates.
Mm-hmm.
But couldn't you force him back to like a transcendental position, like where you're talking about transcendental preconditions of experience, and then you can show that disagreement necessitates it's not the same subject. So, for example, for two positions to disagree transcendentally, they must posit mutually exclusive necessary preconditions for the possibility of experience, reason, or existence. The Christian account of God is trihypostatic, relational, love is intrinsic being, absolute personal logos, and the Islamic account as absolute monad, no eternal relationality, and will is primary. Propose mutually exclusive foundations for why anything exists or why reason is possible at all. So, thus, their disagreement is not over predications of a shared reference.
No, this is actually one of the points in the Garrity paper is that it's what's actually being disagreed upon is actually more like two mutually exclusive sets. And just because the two different sets have some things in common, it doesn't follow that there's one common set. So in other words, if I have a string of numbers, it's a set, like 10 digits, and I put them in brackets, that's my set. And then I have the same numbers and digits in another set, but I remove one of them. They're two different sets, even though they have 90% in common.
Yeah. Okay, so Garrity makes that point in the paper.
Well,
I guess
Garrity shows that Swinburne's core attributes argument doesn't work as a Thomist, because God is not a being like other empirical beings. This is where Father Deacon was trying to argue at the beginning. God is not a natural object like all other objects, whereby you could get the same object by getting half of it right and half of it wrong. In the case of God, it's more like a set, and that's why the Church Fathers, for example, exclude Arians or Muslims by rejecting Trinity and deity of Christ, right? Basil thinks that if you don't have Trinity, it's not the same God.
Right, and so that's what I was trying to bring in, is that it's actually a rival over which absolute is even capable of grounding the entire debate and conversation.
Yeah, well, I don't think that. And so with Trent, because he's a kind of a foundationalist and they're empiricists, like he's not going to grant any of that like transcendental stuff. He'll be like, no, I don't believe any of that.
Okay. And
they just have a, like, as Thomists and empiricists, like they just have a very naive, basic bitch account of how we, cognate and how we know things and how we. It's just basic. It's just empiricism and Aristotle. That's it.
Yeah. And then I saw Cameron pestering Luigi for a syllogism again, so I just went ahead and gave him one, and it's kind of long, and I don't think you should really need this to get your point, but you tell me if this is kind of where you were going with your argument. I might have made it a bit more modest than you would. I don't know. So the Catholic magisterium has various levels of authority.
I was about to say, okay, I'll do a simple syllogism with the magisterium, but it's exactly where I was going to go.
The Catholic magisterium at various levels of teaching has taught that Muslims worship false gods or demons, and I have Lateran's for London, the false prophet, your references that you showed. Premise 2, the same Catholic magisterium also teaches that Muslims together with Christians adore the one merciful true God. That's Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium. By Catholic principles, the faithful owe religious submission of intellect and will, even to non-infallible teachings of the authentic magisterium, Lumen Gentium 25. So the first conclusion would be that Catholics are bound to submit religious assent to mutually contradictory teachings on
exactly.
worship the true God or demons.
Brilliant.
That keeps going, because I'm trying to show him how it's relevant to the question, like, do they worship the same God or not, right?
Okay, well, I mean, you're talking to a guy who got, I assume, from Dr. Trent, the Bayesian mathematical proof of the papacy. So that's where remember when we made fun of this like 2 years ago?
Yeah.
That's where this comes from.
Yeah. But so premise 4, then, after the first conclusion, is by principle of non-contradiction. It's impossible that Muslims both worship the true God and worship demons. Therefore, either the magisterium contradicts itself on matters of divine worship, undermining its reliability, or Catholics must reject one magisterial strand, undercutting the very basis they use to claim that we worship the same God. So, premise 5, by Catholic epistemology, when faced with apparent contradictions and in non-infallible teachings, interpretation must favor what has been taught everywhere and by all fact. That's from probably going to butcher this, Vincentinian canon, and then consistent with the ordinary universal magisterium through time. So it must be both of those things, unless the earlier consistent teaching is definitively overturned by solemn dogmatic reversal, which we don't have. So premise 6, therefore Catholics are bound either to accept the long-standing consistent teaching that Muslims do not worship the true God, or else face a crisis of magisterial coherence. Thus, even by their own principles, they should still accept that Muslims don't worship the same God. And therefore, your argument does apply to the topic.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, and that's why they wanted to say that the topic wasn't magisterium, when that's exactly what 2 of my DMs said it would be about. Thank you so much. Vane, what's up, man?
That was my turn. Hey, what's up? So, if you wanted, if you like scrub through the debate and like notice basic, like, you know, at like a high speed, notice like how animated and the movements are of, you know, all four of you, like in the corners, you'll see that Frank is like significantly like going back, like, you know, he was disrespectful, like eating and like throwing his hands up, leaning back and forth.
Trent?
Like he was.
You said Frank, you mean Trent?
Or yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, Trent. Yeah, just that, and I just noticed that. And also with the Superman analogy, this is the last thing I wanted to say, is that the other reason why it doesn't work is because whether or not a Clark Kent or Superman or Kal-El can fly does not determine who Kal-El or Clark Kent or Superman is as a person, because Superman can like lose that ability as he does and still retains who he is as a person. So that's not like a rigid designator. I don't know why they would say that.
Yeah, I remember FDA even brought up that the term God is a flaccid designator, and I repeated that to the same statement, and they were like, that guy was like, why not? What do you think? What does it refer to? And I mean, he seemed to just think that it was a sufficient reply to say, well, Muhammad is just saying that it's the same referent in the Bible. Okay, but if the Bible referent is the Trinity in the Old Testament, then that destroys your argument that Muhammad is just using the generic term God for a Unitarian deity. But so he wouldn't even go in that direction. That's how like fragile this dude's psyche and worldview was. He wasn't even willing to entertain like.
But Muslims say the exact same thing about Catholics, that the Trinity is shirk, that Christians are polytheists. So if metaphysical error disqualifies Mormons, how would it not disqualify Muslims? The only answer that I could come up with is because Catholics are just assuming their own paradigm. And so then you end up with the paradigm shift, where they're just like mumbling the definitions and it doesn't mean anything. Where it's like, the Muslims think that a four-sided figure is like a triangle because they're calling it the triangle. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, we're not actually talking about the same thing. So the Catholic position collapses, and the only way to salvage it is to fudge definitions.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, Mormons are actually using. I mean, a Mormon can say, "I believe in Jesus Christ, the divine Son of God the Father." Is that not closer in terms of language to our position? Oh, but wait a minute. What they mean is not even remotely close to what we mean by the terms. But by their argument, Mormons also ought to love and revere the same God as the Muslims and the Jews. And so either way they go on the Mormon challenge proves their position to be dumb.
It's absolutely, it's entirely ad hoc. And I saw one Catholic guy like going around saying like every Eastern Orthodox person's low IQ because they can't figure this out. But the basis of his argument was, Islam is technically a heresy because it grew out of Christianity. Therefore, they have to worship the same God. And it's like,
but that doesn't matter because Mormons are heretics.
Exactly.
Eunomians, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Arians are heretics, and the Church Fathers say that you lose God when you're a heretic.
Right.
The woman at the well is a heretic, and Jesus says you don't have salvation as a Samaritan.
Yeah. So anyway, I just really appreciate it, man. I'm going to be checking out more of your stuff. It's been really eye-opening.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Keep looking, Josh. Last one, then I'm going to bed. What's up, man? Unmute. Josh, unmute. Did Sam Shamoon collect together this patristic reference of Angel of the Lord? This is funny because this would mean that he's basically All right, well, if you're not going to answer, we're done. Thank you guys so much. Everybody have a good night. I'm too tired. I got church tomorrow. Y'all go to church. Go to chalk.com. Use promo code J40 for life to get 44% off, and have a good night.